Hey, it's Ashley. Most cities have secrets. Some are buried in paperwork, some are buried in alleyways, and some are buried much deeper. Tonight's story follows a private investigator named Morgan Cross who thinks she's just chasing down another missing item until the search leads her into a hidden world of witches, ancient magic, and a book that was never meant to belong to anyone. It's called The Verdant Key, and once it's stolen, the whole city starts to feel it. So settle in, because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can find is the truth about the world beneath your feet. The neon sign across the street hummed, painting my office ceiling in strokes of crimson and bruised purple. Rain slicked the window glass, blurring the city into a watercolor mess of headlights and hurried silhouettes. The only light in the room came from that sign and the green glow of my desk lamp, which did little more than illuminate the rings left by 100 late-night coffee cups. My name, painted in peeling gold leaf on the frosty glass of my door, read, Morgan Cross, Private Investigations. It sounded more glamorous than it was. Mostly, it meant I spent my nights listening to the building's ancient plumbing complain and chasing down cheating spouses who thought turning off their phone's location was a masterstroke of subterfuge. The knock on my door was too deliberate for a lost drunk and too polite for a process server. It was 3 clean, measured raps, each one spaced with a precision that felt practiced. I didn't bother calling out. My office was the size of a generous closet. If I could hear the knock, they could hear my chair creak as I stood. I pulled my worn leather jacket from the back of the chair, shrugging it on more out of habit than any need for warmth. The 38 nestled in its shoulder holster was a comforting, familiar weight against my ribs. I opened the door. The woman standing on the other side looked like she'd stepped out of a different world entirely, one that didn't smell of wet asphalt and desperation. She wore a long charcoal gray coat that seemed to drink the dim hallway light, and beneath it, the hint of a deep emerald dress. Her hair was a cascade of silver, not the gray of age, but the gleaming, unnatural silver of moonlight on water, pinned up in loose, intricate knots. But it was her eyes that caught me. They were the color of violet twilight, and they held a stillness that the chaotic city outside couldn't touch. She smelled of rain and something else, something ancient and wild, like crushed green leaves after a thunderstorm. Morgan Cross? Her voice was low, smooth, with an accent I couldn't quite place. It was like honey and old books. That's me, I said, my own voice sounding rough as gravel in comparison. How can I help you? She didn't offer her hand. Instead, her gaze swept over me, a quick, assessing glance that felt less like judgment and more like cataloging. You come recommended. For discretion. People who hire me generally value that, I replied, stepping back to usher her in. Come on in, don't mind the mess. She moved past me with a fluid grace that was entirely at odds with the cramped space. She took the single client chair opposite my desk, her posture perfect, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't seem to notice the stacks of unpaid bills I've been using as a coaster, or the faint smell of stale pizza clinging to the curtains. I sat, leaning back in my own chair, which groaned in protest. So, you got a problem that requires discretion. What kind of problem? She looked me directly in the eye, the violet in her depths unwavering. Someone has stolen something from me. Something very valuable. Family heirlooms, I can do. Jewelry, art, that's also in my wheelhouse. You'll need to give me more than something valuable if you want me to find it. A small, wry smile touched her lips. It's a book, a grimoire. The word hung in the air between us, absurd and out of place. A spellbook, I clarified, keeping my expression neutral. The term is crude but accurate enough, she confirmed. Its name is the Verdant Key, and I want you to find it. I let out a slow breath. My life was strange, sure, but it usually stuck to the realm of the mundane, albeit a gritty version of it. Witches and grimoires were a step too far into the deep end for a Tuesday night. Look, lady, I find missing cars. I find missing people. I don't find missing magic books. You find things that are lost, she countered, her tone gentle but firm. This is lost, and I believe you are uniquely suited to finding it. Your reputation precedes you, Ms. Cross. You see things others don't. I stiffened. That part of my reputation was carefully guarded, a secret I kept even from myself most days. The sight, my grandmother had called it. The ability to see the faint, shimmering traces of magic. The echoes of old spells clinging to objects and places like dust motes in a sunbeam. It was a useless party trick most of the time, a headache-inducing nuisance that made crowds feel like walking static. But occasionally, it helped me notice a detail that was just a little off, a clue that was hidden in plain sight. Who told you about that? I asked, my voice lower now, sharper. A mutual acquaintance, Cassandra Vale. I flinched. Cassandra was the city's most reclusive and most powerful seer. She also owed me a favor from a case that had involved a cursed mirror and a very unfortunate series of traffic accidents. I hadn't heard from her in 2 years. The silver-haired woman's expression softened with understanding. My name is Seraphine, and I am a witch, Miss Cross. What Cassandra can see of the future, I can work in the present. This city has more layers than you know. The Verdant Key is not just a book of spells. In the wrong hands, it can unravel things, structures, memories. The fabric of this reality, in small ways at first, then larger, it must be found. I looked at her, really looked at her. The desperate earnestness in her violet eyes, the way the air around her seemed to hum with a subtle energy. I thought about my overdue rent, the empty fridge in my apartment, and the crushing boredom of the last 6 months. I also thought about the glint of something dangerous and exhilarating in her plea, a spark that lit up the same tired, dusty corners of my soul that my sight usually just irritated. If I take this case, I said slowly, my rates are $500 a day plus expenses, and I'll need an upfront retainer, a substantial one. Of course, Seraphine agreed without hesitation. She reached into an inner pocket of her coat and produced a thick envelope, placing it on my desk. It didn't make a sound. There is more than enough here to cover your initial inquiries. I will pay anything to get it back. I picked up the envelope. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been for its size. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I believed her. All right, I said, leaning forward. The scent of old coffee and rain mixing with the wild green promise she carried into my office. Tell me everything. When was it taken? From where? And who would want to steal a book that can unravel the world? Seraphine leaned in too, her violet eyes locking with mine. For the first time since she'd walked in, I saw a flicker of genuine fear behind her composure. I don't know who took it, but I know they're powerful. They didn't break into my home, Miss Cross. They walked through my wards as if they were smoke, and they left something behind. What? I asked. A single black rose, and a message written in a language that hasn't been spoken aloud in 1,000 years. The air in the office grew suddenly cold, and the humming of the neon sign outside seemed to fade, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a pressure against my eardrums. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. This was a hole in the world, and she was asking me to step into it, armed with a .38 and a retainer full of God knows what. Where can I find this rose? I asked. Her lips curved into a weary, grateful smile. It's waiting for you. On my kitchen table. The drive to Seraphine's neighborhood was a lesson in contrasts. My beat-up sedan, a car that ran on stubbornness and prayer, sputtered through streets that gradually shed their gritty urban skin. The liquor stores and check-cashing places gave way to artisanal coffee shops and art galleries with names like single, pretentious nouns. The buildings grew taller, cleaner, the sidewalks wider. Finally, I turned onto a cobblestone street lined with ancient, beefy trees, their branches interlacing overhead to form a canopy that muffled the city's distant roar. Her building was a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and soaring iron-framed windows, looking like it had been airlifted from a more tasteful corner of Europe. She met me at the street-level entrance, the heavy glass door swinging open before I could even reach for the handle. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of beeswax, drying herbs, and something that reminded me of a library after a sudden rainstorm. There were no locks on the door, only a series of intricate, swirling patterns etched into the frame. As I crossed the threshold, I felt a faint, tingling sensation, like walking through static. My sight flared, and for a split second, the patterns glowed a soft, defensive blue before fading back into inert metal. As I stare, Seraphine murmured, her eyes on my face, watching for my reaction. They didn't break in. Her apartment took up the entire top floor. It was a vast, open space with polished concrete floors and exposed wooden beams. One entire wall was made of glass, overlooking the glittering sprawl of the city below. But my attention wasn't on the view. It was on the plant life. There were plants everywhere, hanging from the high ceiling in macrame planters, trailing down the brick walls, clustered in pots on every available surface. Ferns with fronds like delicate green lace, succulents with jewel-toned leaves, climbing vines heavy with waxy purple flowers. The air was alive with them, a silent, breathing jungle perched above the city. This wasn't just decorating, this was an ecosystem. They're my sentinels, she explained, following my gaze. And my alarms, not one of them felt a thing. That sent a genuine chill down my spine. To bypass a system that was both magical and alive, whoever did this wasn't just a thief. They were a ghost. She led me to the kitchen, a sleek island of dark wood and stainless steel set in the corner of the main room. And there, sitting on a polished slate coaster in the center of the island, was the rose. It was the blackest thing I had ever seen. It wasn't a dark red or deep purple. It was a true light-absorbing black, the color of a void. The petals were so dark they seemed to drink the warm light of the apartment, creating a small, cold pocket of shadow around themselves. The stem was an unnaturally straight, thornless black, and the leaves had the brittle, papery texture of something that had been flash frozen. Even from a few feet away, I could feel a wrongness radiating from it, a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the cold of a closed door, of a final word. And beside it, scrawled on a small cream-colored card in a spidery, angular script, was the message. The characters were sharp, all harsh angles and jagged lines. Looking at them made my eyes water, like trying to focus on something just out of phase with reality. My sight surged, a sickening lurch behind my temples. The room didn't just shimmer, it fractured. The vibrant green of the plants bled into shades of gray and decay. The warmth from the lights vanished, replaced by a damp, subterranean chill. The rose wasn't just black, it was a hole, a point of absolute nothingness that was pulling the light and life out of everything around it. And the words on the card, they weren't just writing. They were a series of tiny, focused wounds in the air itself, each one seeping a faint, oily darkness. I stumbled back, a hand going to my head. The world snapped back into focus. The green was lush, the light was warm, and Seraphine was looking at me with an expression of profound empathy. "You see it," she stated. It wasn't a question. "See what?" I managed, my throat dry. "A creepy flower and some graffiti." "Don't." Her voice was soft but held a core of steel. "Don't lie to me, Morgan. Not about this. It's why I came to you. Why Cassandra sent you to me." I let my hand drop from my head, the headache already receding, leaving a faint, throbbing echo. "What was that, the message?" "A binding," she said, her gaze drifting to the rose. "And a promise. The language is that of the unsteady court, the gentry who prefer the shadows. Roughly, it translates to, a debt of sunlight is owed and will be paid in shadow." "A fairy tale," I scoffed, but the words felt hollow even to me. The unseelie court. Names I'd only ever heard in whispers from Cassandra, in warnings about the deep, old magics that predated the city by millennia. "A fairy tale that just stole my family's most dangerous heirloom," Seraphine countered gently. She moved to a heavy wooden chest against the far wall, her back to me. The Verdant Key isn't just a book of spells, as I said. It's a book of correspondences, a ledger of what connects to what, how life is woven from death, how growth is fed by decay, how sunlight is just another form of energy, one that can be redirected. She opened the chest. Instead of gold or artifacts, it was lined with velvet and held dozens of smaller, intricately carved wooden boxes. She lifted one out, no bigger than my palm, and brought it to the counter. The person who took it doesn't want to turn a prince into a frog. They want to understand the equation, to find the source code of the world and edit it. And they left this as a calling card. She opened the small box. Inside, nestled in black silk, was a single petal. It was the same impossible black as the rose, but this one was different. As I watched, a single drop of dew, black as ink, welled up on its surface. It didn't fall. It just sat there, shimmering, a tiny sphere of captured night. "This is from the same plant," she said, "but it's been altered. It's a tracker, a very specific one. It will resonate in the presence of the grimoire." She pushed the box toward me. "I can't use it. The connection is too strong for me. It would be like a beacon leading them right back to me. But your sight, it's different. It's observational. You don't wield magic, you perceive it. You might be able to follow the resonance without being caught." I looked from the petal to Seraphine's face. Her violet eyes were pleading, but beneath it was a fierce intelligence, a calculated gamble. She wasn't just a damsel in distress. She was a player moving her knight across a board I hadn't even known existed. "And if I'm caught, then you run," she said simply. "You're a private investigator, Morgan. You're good at running and good at hiding. I can offer you more protection than that." She placed a smooth gray river stone on the counter next to the box. "Hold this. If you are in true, immediate danger, crush it. I will know, and I will come." I picked up the stone. It was cool and solid, a grounding piece of reality in a conversation that was rapidly spiraling into the unreal. I looked at the petal again. My sight didn't flare this time, but I could feel a faint, discordant hum coming from it, like a single sour note played on a cello in an empty hall. It was unpleasant, but it was a direction. "All right," I said, my decision made. "I'll take your petal and your rock, but I'm starting from the beginning. Who else knew you had this book?" "No one," she said, a little too quickly. "Seraphine," I pressed, my voice taking on the gentle, probing tone I used with nervous witnesses. "Something like this. There's always someone, a rival, an ex-lover, a student you expelled, someone who coveted it. Give me a name, a place to start." She hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of the stone. "There is a place, a marketplace. It's not on any map. It's called the Gilded Cage. It's where people who live in the layers between worlds go to trade information, artifacts, favors. If the Verdant Key has surfaced, if it's being offered to the highest bidder, someone there will have heard of it. A black market for magic," I summarized. "The only market that truly matters," she corrected. "Getting in is the trick. It moves. It never has a permanent address." She went back to the chest and returned with a small brass compass. The needle wasn't pointing north. It was spinning, slowly, lazily. "This will lead you to the door, but it will only work at twilight. When the world is caught between day and night, it responds to ambiguity." "And the password?" "Open sesame," I asked, a dry humor my only shield against the rising tide of impossibility. A genuine tired smile touched her lips. "There is no password. There is only a price. The doorman will require a memory, a happy one." The smile fell off my face. "He wants what?" "A memory," she repeated, her gaze unwavering. "A genuine, unblemished moment of joy. He takes it, you don't get it back. That's the toll." I stared at her. My life was a catalog of bad choices and near misses, seasoned with a few fleeting moments of peace. The thought of handing one of them over, of having a piece of my own soul shaved away to pay a cover charge, was nauseating. But then I looked at the black rose. at the message from a court of nightmares, and I thought of a city unraveling thread by thread. My small, happy moments seemed like a fair price. Fine, I said, my voice tight. A memory. What about this? I gestured to the box with the petal. That's for you, she said. To find the book amidst the noise. The compass is to find the market. The stone is to call for help. And the retainer, she added, her eyes flicking to the envelope still tucked in my jacket pocket, is for your discretion and your expenses. I imagine buying a memory isn't cheap. You imagined correctly, I muttered. I pocketed the compass in the petal box, the stone already a warm, familiar weight in my palm. Stay here. Don't open the door for anyone. Don't touch that rose. If you feel anything at all, you call me. I don't have your number, she pointed out. I found a crumpled receipt on my desk and scribbled my cell on the back. Now you do. I left her standing in her green, vibrant fortress, surrounded by plants that couldn't protect her, with a hole in her world that she couldn't plug. The door swung shut behind me, the tingling sensation of her words a faint farewell. Back on the cobblestone street, the city's noise rushed back in, and the whole encounter felt like a fevered dream. But the weight of the stone in my pocket and the sour hum of the petal in the box were undeniable. The sun was bleeding out over the horizon, painting the underbelly of the clouds in shades of orange and violent pink when I got back to my office. Twilight. The perfect ambiguous hour for finding a magical black market. I tossed the Seraphine's retainer envelope onto my desk without opening it. I didn't want to know if it was cash or something else that might complicate things. I just needed to focus. I pulled out the brass compass. The needle had stopped spinning. Instead of pointing north, it quivered, pointing to a blank expanse of my office wall, the one behind my desk plastered with city maps and old case photos. Great, I sighed. Through the wall. I closed my eyes, focusing on the petal in its box. The sour note was clearer now, a dissonant hum that pulled at my attention. I opened my eyes and looked at the compass again. The needle wasn't pointing at the wall. It was pointing through it. Following the line of direction with my finger, I traced a path from my office, through the building, across the street, down 2 blocks, and into an alley behind a defunct textile factory. The gilded cage sounded charming. I grabbed my jacket, checked the 38, and headed out. My car protested for a solid minute before agreeing to start. The drive was short, but the city transformed as dusk settled. The mundane seemed to recede and the edges of things blurred. For a moment, I thought I saw a creature with too many limbs crouching on a rooftop, but it was just a grotesquely shaped water tower, caught in the glare of a passing street lamp. My sight was playing tricks on me. Or maybe it was just waking up. The alley was exactly what you'd expect. Dark, damp, and smelling of stale beer and despair. A dumpster groaned, and a scattering of cats hissed from the shadows. The compass needle pointed to a brick wall, dead center. There was no door, no gateway, just stained, crumbling bricks. I leaned against the opposite wall, the grit rough against my jacket, and waited. I wasn't sure what for. A prompt, a sign, a talking cat? Then I saw him. He wasn't there 1 second, and the next he was. He simply stepped out of the shadows beside the dumpster as if he'd been there all along. He was tall and impossibly thin, wearing a tattered tailcoat that had seen better centuries. His skin was the color of old parchment, and his hair was a chaotic shock of black that seemed to writhe on its own. His face was a collection of sharp angles, but it was his eyes that stopped my breath. They were solid, gleaming obsidian with no whites, no pupils, just 2 polished empty stones that reflected the dim light of the alley. Morgan Cross, he said. His voice was like gravel and silk, a raspy whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. You are expected. And you are late. The traffic was a nightmare, I replied, my hand hovering near my holster. You're the doorman? A watcher of thresholds, he corrected, giving a slow, deliberate bow that was more mockery than respect. I am Malachi, and you know the toll. I do. I braced myself. What do I do? You simply think of it, he rasped, his obsidian eyes fixed on mine. Find your moment, the purest, most unblemished joy you possess. Hold it in your mind like a candle, and do not resist. I closed my eyes. This was a terrible idea. A vulnerability I was willingly offering to a creature made of shadow and dust. But what choice did I have? I searched my mental archives, pushing past the bitter arguments, the loneliness, the cheap victories of solved cases. I went deeper, to a time before the office, before the city, before the 38. A summer day at the lake with my grandmother. The sun on my face, the cool water on my feet, and the absolute uncomplicated certainty that I was loved and safe. It was a perfect, shimmering bubble of happiness. The moment I isolated it, it was gone. A hook, cold and sharp, latched into that memory and yanked. There was a sudden, nauseating void in my mind, a ghostly ache for something I couldn't quite recall anymore. I knew something good had happened, once, on a sunny day by the water, but the feeling was gone, excised with surgical precision. All that remained was the knowledge of the loss. My hand clenched into a fist. Anger, hot and sharp, surged in its place. He sighed, a sound like wind whistling through a tomb. Ah, a child's joy, a classic, a little bland for my taste, but nourishing. He stepped aside and gestured to the blank brick wall. The gilded cage awaits. As he moved, the wall behind him shimmered. The brick dissolved like sugar in water, replaced by a scene so jarring it made my head spin. The grimy alley was gone, replaced by a cavernous space humming with activity. The air was thick with the scent of strange incense, roasting meat that smelled nothing like any animal I knew, and the low murmur of 100 conversations in a dozen different languages. Above, the ceiling was a vaulted dome of stained glass that depicted a starless night sky, glowing with its own internal light. This was the gilded cage. It looked less like a market and more like the world's most dangerous antique fair. Stalls were crammed together, selling everything from bottled lightning to what looked like carefully labeled nightmares. Patrons, a bizarre menagerie of beings, drifted through the crowds. Some looked human enough, though they carried an aura of wrongness that my sight picked up immediately. Others were less subtle, a hulking figure made of shifting stones, a woman whose hair was a cloud of living moths, and a small, goblin-like creature haggling over a jar of eyeballs with a woman in a suit that seemed to be woven from shadows. And the name made sense now. The entire space was enclosed by a colossal dome of interlocking golden-hued metal bars. We were in the cage, a gilded one. My gaze was drawn to a large central platform where an auction was underway. A skeletal creature in a tattered robe was holding up a tarnished silver mirror. As I was saying, the soul it shows is not your own, but the one you most resemble. Do I hear an offer of 3 regrets? I pulled myself together, the anger over my stolen memory a useful shield against the sensory overload. I needed information. I started moving, keeping to the edges of the crowd, my hand never far from my holster. My sight was going haywire, a riot of colors and auras, but I forced myself to focus, to sift through the noise. I was looking for the same sour note I'd felt from the pedal, the signature of the grimoire. The brass compass felt cold in my pocket. I ignored it, relying on my own senses. I passed a stall where a hooded figure was selling bottled whispers. Customers would uncork them and press the tiny bottles to their ears, their expressions shifting from hope to despair. I saw another stall offering curses, neatly packaged with pretty ribbons. This wasn't just a market. It was a graveyard of intangible things. And then I caught it, faint but distinct, the sour, dissonant hum. It was coming from a quiet corner of the cage, away from the main thoroughfare. I followed the pull, winding between stalls selling shrunken heads and maps to places that couldn't exist. The source was a small, unassuming stall draped in heavy velvet. The proprietor was a woman who looked like she'd been carved from aged driftwood. her face with a maze of deep lines, her eyes cloudy cataracts. Yet she turned her head to face me as I approached, her sight as unnervingly accurate as Malachi's. "The grimoire," she said, her voice a dry rustle. "You're here about the grimoire." My heart hammered against my ribs. "You know where it is?" "I know of it," she corrected. "I felt it when it arrived, a very old, very green thing. Unpleasant, like a forest dying from the inside." She gestured to a small, empty space on her table. "It was here, briefly. The seller didn't even name it. Just called it the gardener's handbook." He was a small man, quiet, smelled of dust and forgotten places. "What did he look like?" "Like he was trying not to be looked at," she said with a shrug. "A blur, a man-shaped hole in the world. He sold it for a sum." "To who?" The old woman's cloudy eyes drifted towards the central platform where the auction was still in full swing. The skeletal auctioneer was now holding up a cage with a small, whimpering creature made of pure light. "To the highest bidder, of course." "Where else?" I followed her gaze, my stomach sinking. "Who bought it?" "That I cannot say," she rasped, a flicker of something like fear in her expression. "The bidding was done in private, but the one who arranged the sale, that I can tell you. He's over there, the man in the white suit." I looked. Standing at the edge of the auction platform, watching the proceedings with an air of detached amusement, was a man. He was impeccably dressed in a suit the color of fresh cream, a stark contrast to the grungy, opulent chaos of the cage. His hair was silver, not the moonlit silver of seraphine's, but a cold, metallic silver. And he was human, or at least he looked it. He radiated an aura of such absolute predatory calm that he set my teeth on edge. As I watched, he smiled at something the skeletal auctioneer said, and the smile was a chilling, beautiful thing. "He's a broker," the old woman whispered, leaning closer. "A facilitator, they call him the alabaster gentleman. He finds things for people, very specific things." He would be the one to ask. "But be careful, investigator. He doesn't trade in coin. He trades in leverage." I had a feeling the leverage he wanted was the book itself. "Thanks for the tip," I said, pulling a 50 from my pocket, the bill damp with sweat. She waved it away with a gnarled hand. "Keep your money. Just be careful what you trade in this place. The price is always higher than you think." Her words echoed the hollowness in my own mind. I nodded grimly and moved away, my path set. The anger over my lost memory was a cold fire in my gut, a fuel source I could use. I navigated through the throng, my eyes locked on the man in the white suit. He hadn't noticed me yet. He was too busy admiring the caged light creature. As I got closer, I felt a new sensation. It was the pedal in my pocket, the sour note suddenly sharpening, vibrating like a tuning fork. The book was close, very close. The alabaster gentleman had it or knew precisely where it was. I stopped a few feet away, feigning interest in a nearby stall selling knives with blades made of solidified shadow. The alabaster gentleman turned then, as if I had spoken his name. His eyes, the color of winter sky, met mine. There was no surprise in them, only a cool, curious appraisal. He knew who I was. Of course he did. Everyone seemed to. "Morgan Cross," he said, his voice as smooth and cultured as his appearance. He didn't shout. The words carried through the din as if they were private. "The private eye. I've been expecting you. Seraphine is nothing if not predictable." He held out a hand. It was pale and perfectly manicured. I didn't take it. "You have something that belongs to my client," I said, my voice flat. The alabaster gentleman chuckled, a low, pleasant sound that was utterly devoid of warmth. "Possession is such a temporary concept, wouldn't you agree? The Verdant Key is not a thing to be owned. It is a key to be turned. My employer simply wishes to study the lock." "Who's your employer?" I asked, my gaze sweeping over him. He didn't carry the grimoire, but my sight was screaming at me. The sour hum so intense now it was almost a physical taste in my mouth, like copper in decay. The signature was all over him. He'd handled it recently. A name is a powerful currency in a place like this, he demurred, adjusting his cufflink. And I am a frugal man. Let's just say my employer has a long-standing grudge against the kind of life-giving magic Seraphine's family so arrogantly hoards. He feels it's an imbalance. A debt of sunlight to be paid in shadow, I quoted. A flicker of genuine interest crossed his face. You're more informed than most. Yes, an old score. The key will help us even the odds. We don't want to destroy the world, Miss Cross. We simply want to recalibrate it, give the darkness its due. He was a zealot in a $1,000 suit. The book isn't yours, I said again, my patience gone. This is your only chance to give it back. And what will you do if I don't? He asked, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Shoot me? With that quaint little iron weapon you're carrying? I should warn you, violence is so declassed in the cage. The management frowns upon it. Then what do you suggest? We thumb wrestle for it. I suggest a trade, he said smoothly. A transaction. It's what I do. You give me something I want, and I give you something you want. I have nothing you want. Oh, but you do, he purred, stepping closer. The air around him was cold, sterile, like a morgue. You have the most valuable commodity of all, a perspective. You see the world in a way no one else here does. You stand between their world and ours. You are a bridge. I want to know what it's like to be you. I want to see through your eyes just for a moment. Give me a memory of your sight, of what you see when the world shimmers. The demand hit me like a physical blow. He didn't want a happy memory like Malachi. He wanted the core of me, the secret I guarded most fiercely, the thing that made me useful but also isolated me. My sight. I was saved from having to answer by a sudden, deafening chime that echoed through the cage. It wasn't a bell, but a sound like a crystal goblet shattering in slow motion, amplified 1,000 times. Every creature in the market froze, the chatter died, the haggling ceased. Even the cage-like creature went dim. The alabaster gentleman's head snapped up toward the vaulted ceiling. The calm facade cracked for just a second, replaced by a flash of irritation. The curfew. How tedious. What curfew? I asked, my hand instinctively going to the stone in my pocket, its smooth surface a small comfort. The cage doesn't stay in one place for long, he explained, his eyes already scanning for an exit. Its master has a schedule. We have 5 minutes to be out before the door closes and it relocates, and anyone left inside goes with it, usually not in one piece. Panic began to ripple through the crowd. The patrons, so calm and predatory moments before, were now a herd, shoving and pushing towards the entrance, which had once again become a solid brick wall. Malachi was there, a thin, imposing figure, arms crossed, watching the exodus with amusement. This was my chance. He was distracted. The grimoire wasn't on him, but the trail was. I could feel it. I grabbed his arm. The book, where is it? He looked down at my hand on his pristine white sleeve and then back at my face. A slow, predatory smile spread across his lips. It's a shame. We could have been such good partners. He shook my arm off and, with a movement too fast to track, plunged his other hand into a deep pocket of his trousers. He didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a handful of what looked like gray, metallic dust. With a sharp exhalation, he blew it directly into my face. It wasn't dust. It was a swarm of tiny, needle-sharp insects made of solidified shadow. They hit my eyes and my open mouth, 1,000 icy, stinging points. I stumbled back, gagging, my hands flying to my face. My vision went black, not just from the impact, but from a spreading, consuming darkness. My sight went haywire, overwhelmed. The auras of the cage's inhabitants turned into screaming, cacophonous nightmares. The world became a vortex of pain and sound. Through the chaos, I heard the alabaster gentleman's voice, clear as a bell. A down payment on our trade, Miss Cross. A glimpse into the dark. We'll be in touch. Then the world dissolved. I came to on the cold, damp asphalt of the alley. The gilded cage was gone. The brick wall was just a brick wall again. The only sounds were the distant wail of a siren and the drip of water from a broken pipe. My head was splitting, my throat was raw, and my eyes burned as if I'd stared at the sun. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. The memory of the shadow insects sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I fumbled for the river stone, my fingers closing around it. Its smooth, grounding energy was the only thing keeping me from losing my dinner in the dumpster. I hadn't been crushed it, the danger had passed, but the threat remained, and the trail wasn't gone. The sour hum of the grimoire was fainter now, but it was there. A fading echo, but it had a direction. The alabaster gentleman hadn't vanished. He had run, and he'd left a trail. My car, my stubborn, ugly, beautiful car, was still parked at the end of the alley. I stumbled towards it, fumbling for my keys. Every flicker of a street lamp sent a spike of pain through my skull, the afterimage of the shadow insects dancing in my peripheral vision. I got in, slammed the door, and just breathed for a minute, the familiar, greasy smell of my own upholstery, a welcome anchor to reality. I pulled out the compass. The needle was still pointing, not back towards my office, but out of the city, towards the industrial rust belt on the waterfront, the old shipyards, a place of massive, hollowed-out structures and forgotten histories, the perfect place to hide something you didn't want found. Before I could turn the key, my phone buzzed. Seraphine's name lit up the screen. I answered, my voice a hoarse croak. Cross. Morgan, are you all right? I felt something. A disturbance. Your friend in the white suit is a real piece of work, I said, wincing as I tried to focus on the taillights in front of me. He's got the book, or he knows exactly where it is. And he's got a weird fixation with my eyes. There was a beat of silence on her end. He offered you a trade, didn't he? How'd you guess? He trades in perspective, in unique ways of seeing the world. He's a metaphysical voyeur, she said, her voice tight with a mix of anger and fear. The shadow sting, it won't kill you, but it will leave a trace, a mark. He can see what you see now, if he chooses to. A one-way mirror. My blood ran cold. I was being watched, not just followed, but observed on a level I couldn't even comprehend. I felt violated, stripped bare. That's just fantastic, I bit out. Anything else I should know about this guy before I go after him? Just be careful, Morgan, she pleaded. The name he uses is just a mask. The man underneath, he's old, and he's collected secrets from kings and creatures for centuries. He doesn't bite fair. No kidding, I muttered. Look, I've got a lead. I'm heading to the shipyards. Stay put. Lock your doors. Don't talk to any pale men in nice suits. Wait, she said, her tone urgent. The shipyards they're a place of thresholds, of endings. The grimoire's magic will be volatile there. The life magic it contains is in direct opposition to the atmosphere of decay and rust. He could be like a beacon, but also a catalyst. It might start to leak. What? I asked, pulling out onto the expressway, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and white. Life, she said simply. Wild, untamed, uncontrolled life. The Verdant Key is trying to get back to nature in its own way. Be prepared for the city to get a little strange around you. Strange is my baseline, Seraphine, I said and hung up. The closer I got to the docks, the more my head cleared, the phantom pain from the shadow insects receding into a dull throb. But something else was taking its place. My sight was on high alert, the world fraying at the edges. For a moment, the graffiti on a highway overpass seemed to writhe, the spray paint letters twisting like snakes before snapping back into their crude shapes. A rat scurrying across the road stopped, looked at me with eyes that glowed like embers, then vanished down a storm drain. Leaking life. Great. The industrial park was a labyrinth of decaying buildings. The compass needle pointed me towards a colossal abandoned warehouse, its corrugated iron skin rusted to the color of dried blood. A shattered sign on its facade read, "A Thellard Hybrid Shipping and Receiving," the words barely legible beneath decades of grime. The main doors were chained shut, but one of the small personnel doors was ajar, hanging on a single hinge like a tired sigh. I drew my 38, the familiar weight a small comfort against the overwhelming weirdness of the night. I slipped through the opening into a vast, echoing space. The air was thick with the smell of salt, rust, and damp rot. Moonlight filtered through grimy skylights high above, illuminating colossal, silent machinery frozen in a state of eternal disuse. This was a graveyard of industry. The trail was stronger here. The sour note was almost a physical presence, a metallic tang on the back of my tongue. My eyes scanned the cavernous space. Then I saw it, in the center of the warehouse floor in a perfect circle of about 30 feet in diameter. Everything was green. The concrete floor was gone, covered in a lush, impossibly vibrant carpet of moss. Vines with glowing, phosphorescent flowers snaked up the idle machinery. Fungi that pulsed with a soft blue light clung to the rusted pillars. It was an alien, beautiful ecosystem thriving in the heart of decay. And in the very center of this pocket jungle stood a figure, their back to me. It was the alabaster gentleman. His white suit was a stark slash of sterile order against the chaotic bloom. He was holding the grimoire. The book was exactly as Seraphine had described, and yet more. It was bound in what looked like living wood, the grains swirling in impossible patterns. A silver clasp, shaped like a coiled serpent, held it shut. But the book wasn't closed. Not fully. A sliver of a gap showed between the covers, and from that gap the magic was pouring out, creating the living oasis around it. I started forward, my footsteps silent on the gritty floor. I was 20 feet away when he spoke without turning. "A marvel, isn't it?" he said, his voice echoing in the immense space. "A world's worth of life, untapped. All it needed was the right key and a little encouragement." I raised the 38, aiming for the center of his back. "Put the book down, nice and slow." He finally turned, and the smile on his face was serene, utterly unconcerned by the pistol aimed at his heart. "Miss Cross, I was hoping you'd make it. You're just in time for the main event." "I'm not here for the show," I said, my knuckles white on the grip. "I'm here to take that back to its owner." "You misunderstand," he said, gesturing to the vibrant life around him with one pale hand. "This is what we're fighting against. This unchecked, chaotic growth. The sun burns, the forest grows, the flower blooms. It's a tyranny. A loud, vulgar, endless cycle of consumption and decay. My employer simply wishes to introduce a little silence, a little entropy, to let things rest." "That the bedtime story you tell yourself?" I shot back. "Looks to me like you're the one who opened the book." "A controlled experiment," he corrected smoothly, "to show you the alternative. The world you and Seraphine defend. Wild, inefficient, beautiful, perhaps in its way, but fundamentally unfair." He took a step back towards the book. "But I am a man of my word. I did offer you a trade. Let's make it a simple one. Your sight for one glimpse inside, one page. You walk away, and I let my employer work. What do you say?" "I say you're out of your mind," I said, and squeezed the trigger. The report of the 38 was deafening in the cavernous warehouse, but the bullet never reached him. A vine, thick as my arm and covered in wicked thorns, shot up from the mossy floor and intercepted the slug with a wet thwack. The bullet flattened against the woody stalk, falling harmlessly to the ground. The vine didn't even flinch. "Crude," the alabaster gentleman skid, shaking his head. "I told you, violence is so de classe." More vines began to stir, slithering across the floor like pythons. The glowing flowers on the machinery seemed to pulse brighter, their light casting long, dancing shadows. The book was reacting to my hostility. The magic was protecting its new master. I was outmatched, my gun was useless, and my sight was a liability, broadcasting my every move to him. My only advantage was the element of surprise, which I had just spectacularly wasted. Think, Morgan. Don't fight the magic. Use it. I holstered the 38. It was dead weight. All right, I said, raising my empty hands. You win the trade. His smile returned, triumphant. A wise choice. I'll show you what I see, I continued, my mind racing. You want to see through my eyes? Fine. Take a good look. I closed my eyes and didn't fight the sight. I embraced it. I pushed it past its normal limits, opening the floodgates. I didn't focus on the magic of the grimoire or the vines. I focused on the warehouse. I let my perception sink into the rust, the decay, the 100 years of neglect. I amplified the silence, the cold, the slow, patient death that had ruled this place long before he arrived. I showed him the opposite of the life he was creating. I showed him the two. I felt a jolt, a psychic backlash. He hadn't been prepared for this, for the sheer oppressive weight of entropy. I had weaponized my own despair. He staggered, a hand flying to his temple, the serene mask cracking. What is this? It's the other side of the coin, I snarled, my eyes snapping open. The world was a dizzying kaleidoscope of auras and decay, but I pushed through it. You wanted to see? See this. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the petal box. I didn't open it. I threw it. Not at him, but past him, into the heart of the glowing jungle. The box hit the mossy floor and burst open. The black petal tumbled out. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The grimoire, which had been passively leaking life magic, shrieked, not an audible sound, but a psychic scream that vibrated in my bones. The petal, a piece of its dark opposite, was anathema to it. The life magic in the warehouse didn't just stop, it reversed. The glowing flowers flickered and died, turning to black dust. The vibrant moss curled in on itself, brown and brittle. The vines writhed in agony, their leaves shriveling, their tough bark cracking and falling away to reveal dry, hollow cores. The beautiful, chaotic oasis was collapsing in on itself, consumed by the concentrated rot from the petal. The alabaster gentleman cried out, stumbling back as the very ground he stood on withered beneath him. The grimoire, now deprived of its power source and under attack from its antithesis, clattered shut, the silver serpent clasp snapping tight. In that moment of pure chaotic reversal, I lunged. I didn't go for him. I went for the book. I dove headfirst into the dying circle of decay, the brittle, lifeless plants crunching under my hands and knees. The air was thick with the stench of veiled magic. My fingers closed around the grimoire's living wood cover. It felt warm, like a dying animal. Get away from that. His voice was raw fury. I didn't look back. I scrambled up, clutching the book to my chest, and ran. I didn't run for the door. I ran for the massive, rusted machinery. I scrambled up a conveyor belt, my feet slipping on the decaying rubber. Behind me, I heard a snarl of rage and the tearing of metal. He was coming. The warehouse was a maze of towering dead machines. I vaulted over a guardrail, landing hard on a metal catwalk 10 feet below. The impact jolted through my bones, but I held on to the book. The grimoire was growing hot in my hands, a frantic, trapped thing. I risked a glance back. The alabaster gentleman wasn't following me. He was standing where the jungle had been, his white suit smeared with dirt and decay. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the black petal, a look of profound, horrified fascination on his face. Then he looked up, and his eyes, the color of a winter sky, found mine. The cold, predatory calm was gone, replaced by a burning, intelligent hatred. This isn't over, Ms. Cross, he called out, his voice no longer smooth but sharp as glass. You haven't won. You've only chosen a side. and you have no idea what you've just taken into your protection." I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and fled, running through the metallic skeleton of the old warehouse, the heavy grimoire a hot, living weight against my chest. The echoes of his words followed me out into the night. I didn't stop running until I was blocks away, hidden in the shadow of an abandoned container ship, my lungs burning, the book in my arms humming with a faint, frantic energy. I was alone. I had it, the Verdant Key, and I had no idea what to do next. The adrenaline crash was a physical thing, a wave of cold that left my hands shaking and my knees weak. I slid down the rusted flank of the container ship, the corrugated metal groaning in protest. The grimoire was still clutched to my chest, its heat a frantic, living heartbeat against my own. Out here, away from the warehouse, its energy felt different. Less like a dying animal and more like a caged bird, beating its wings against the bars of my grip. My phone. I needed to call Seraphine. I fumbled in my jacket, my numb fingers closing around the smooth, cold stone instead. The river stone. My lifeline. I hadn't crushed it. I hadn't needed to. The thought was a small, solitary ember of pride in the overwhelming bonfire of my exhaustion. Finally, my fingers found the phone. The screen was cracked, a spider web of fractured light, but it worked. I hit Seraphine's number. She answered on the first ring, her voice a sharp, worried wire. "Morgan?" "I have it," I said, the words coming out in a ragged gasp. I leaned my head back against the cold metal of the container, looking up at a sky choked with the diffuse orange glow of the city. No stars, just light pollution and the occasional blinking of a plane. There was a pause on the other end, a held breath. Then, a sound. It wasn't a word, not a gasp or a sob. It was a sigh, a single, long exhalation of a breath she must have been holding for days. It was the sound of a knot coming undone. "Where are you?" she asked, her voice now steady, anchored by a new, solid resolve. "The old Dullard shipyards, down by the water." "Stay there," she commanded. "Don't move. I'm coming." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, my arm suddenly too heavy to hold up. I was left in the buzzing silence of the docks, alone with my thoughts and a book that was trying to terraform my lap. The humming from the grimoire was getting stronger. I looked down. A single emerald green vine, no thicker than a piece of string, had pushed its way through the book's wooden cover. It uncurled slowly, a tiny, perfect leaf unfurling at its tip. It reached towards me, hesitant, like the tendril of a plant seeking the sun. It didn't feel hostile. It felt curious. I reached out with a trembling finger and touched the leaf. The world didn't just shatter. It bloomed. My sight didn't just flare. It detonated. I wasn't in the shipyard anymore. I was somewhere else. Everywhere else. I was the roots of a 1,000-year-old oak, burrowing deep into the cool, dark earth. I was the capillary in a leaf, drinking in sunlight. I was the explosive, joyful burst of a seed pod cracking open. I felt the slow, patient life of a tree, the frantic, ephemeral buzz of a mayfly, the deep, silent pulse of a forest breathing in unison under the moon. It was an overwhelming, symphonic cacophony of existence, and it was all happening inside my head. I ripped my finger away, gasping, my back slamming against the container ship. The vine withdrew, retracting back into the cover as if it had never been there. I was back on the docks, shivering, the salt-tinged air burning my lungs. The ghost of 1,000 lives still echoed in my blood. A pair of headlights cut through the gloom, sweeping across the rusted landscape. A sleek, black car, the kind that cost more than my entire building, pulled to a silent stop a dozen yards away. The door opened, and Seraphine stepped out. She wasn't wearing the witch's coat of our first meeting. She was in simple black trousers and a dark turtleneck, her silver hair unbound, a shimmering cascade down her back. She looked like a warrior goddess who had just discarded her armor. She didn't run, but she moved with an urgent, ground-eating grace that ate up the distance between us. Her violet eyes found me, then dropped to the grimoire in my lap. A flicker of something complex crossed her face, relief, fear, and a deep, bone-weary sorrow. "Morgan," she breathed, crouching in front of me. Her gaze swept over me, taking in the ripped jacket, the grime on my face, the tremor in my hands. "What did he do to you?" "He tried to buy my eyesight," I said, my voice still rough. I countered with a taste of existential dread. He didn't like it. I gestured with my chin toward the book. "It's lively." "I can feel it," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the grimoire. "It's afraid. And it's angry." It was woken violently. She reached out, not to touch the book, but me. Her fingers, cool and steady, gently brushed my cheek, pushing a stray strand of hair from my face. The touch was grounding, a small, quiet anchor in the storm. "And you, he marked you." The memory of the shadow insects was a fresh spike of pain. "A one-way mirror," I confirmed. "He can see what I see, if he looks." "Not anymore," she said, her voice firm. With her other hand, she made a small, intricate gesture in the air. Her fingers glowed with a soft silver light, weaving a pattern that looked like a starburst. She gently pressed her glowing fingertips to my temples. The sensation was cool and clean, like mint-infused water washing over a wound. The phantom itch behind my eyes, the feeling of being watched, vanished. "How did you—" "A simple counterspell," she said, a small, sad smile on her lips. "One of the first things we learned. He relies on people not knowing they're a window. Shattering the glass is easy." She lowered her hands, the light fading. "Thank you, Morgan, for everything." "Don't thank me yet," I grunted, trying to push myself up. My legs felt like jelly. "Your friend the alabaster gentleman seemed to think this was just round one. And he's not wrong." I held out the grimoire. "Here, take it. Get it back to your greenhouse before it tries to turn the pier into a national park." Seraphine didn't take it. She just looked at the book, her expression unreadable. "I can't." "What?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "I just got my ass handed to me by a man in a suit and a killer flower bed for this thing." "What do you mean you can't?" "I mean, I can't take it back to my home," she explained, her voice patient, though her eyes held a deep turmoil. "The alabaster gentleman is right. He knows where I live. He's breached my wards once. He will do it again. And now the book is awake. The moment I bring it back, it will light up like a beacon for him and anyone else like him. It's not safe. So what? We just leave it here? Maybe post a guard?" "No," she said, a sliver of that core of steel I'd seen before returning. "There is a place, a vault. It was built to hold things like this. Things that are too powerful to be free, but too precious to be destroyed. It's the only way." "A vault," I repeated, the word tasting like dust. "Of course there is. Let me guess. We have to solve a riddle from a sphinx and answer 3 riddles from a bridge troll to get in." "Something like that," she conceded. "But the vault isn't the immediate problem. Getting to it is." She stood up and offered me a hand. I took it, and she pulled me to my feet with a strength that belied her slender frame. "We can't stay here. He'll have trackers, not just the one-sided connection he had with you. Real trackers. Things that will follow the book's scent." She took the grimoire from me. The moment it left my hands, the frantic humming subsided, replaced by a low, mournful thrum. She handled it with a reverence that was almost religious, her fingers tracing the swirling grain of the wooden cover. "It trusts you, I think, in its own way. It doesn't often show that much vitality." "Great," I muttered, brushing rust off my jeans. "I'm a pet sitter for a magical book, just what I wanted to be when I grew up." Seraphine gave me a look, a flicker of amusement in her violet eyes. "Come on. My car is this way. We need to move now." We walked back to her sleek black car, a world away from my sputtering sedan. The leather seats enveloped me, and the engine purred to life with a quiet confidence. I felt a pang of something I couldn't name, a sudden awareness of the chasm between our lives. I lived in a world of peeling paint and overdue bills. She lived in a world of ancient magic and silent, powerful cars. As we pulled away from the docks, melting back into the city's gridded arteries, I watched the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a pale figure in a white suit standing on the pier. But there was nothing. Only the endless, indifferent march of the city. "He won't come for it directly again," Seraphine said, as if reading my thoughts. Her hands were steady on the wheel, her gaze fixed on the road. "Not after what happened at the warehouse. That was a direct confrontation, and it failed. He's a creature of leverage and subterfuge. He'll try a different angle." "What angle is that?" "He'll try to separate us," she said simply. "He'll come for you. Without me, you're just a mortal with a magical artifact you can't control. He'll offer you a deal you can't refuse. Or he'll find something you care about and use it against you." "I don't care about anything," I said, the words a reflexive defense. It was mostly true. She glanced at me, her expression softening. "Everyone cares about something, Morgan. He just has to find the right pressure point." We fell into a silence that was less comfortable now, filled with the unspoken threat hanging over us. She drove with an easy confidence, navigating the labyrinthine streets with an instinctual knowledge that no GPS could provide. We weren't heading back to my office or her verdant fortress. We were heading deeper into the city's belly, into older, denser neighborhoods where the buildings leaned against each other like tired giants. "Where are we going?" I finally asked. "To get the key," she said. "Not the grimoire. The key to the vault. The grimoire is a key, yes, but it opens the world. The vault needs something more specific." She parked the car on a narrow, cobblestone street lined with townhouses that looked like they'd been there since the city was founded. Each one was identical, made of dark, soot-stained brick, with black iron railings and gleaming windows that held their secrets close. We walked to one of the identical townhouses, this one with a small brass plaque by the door that read, "The Athenaeum." Seraphine produced a heavy, ornate key and unlocked the door. Inside, it wasn't a home. It was a library that had been holding its breath for 200 years. The air was still and smelled of old paper, leather, and beeswax. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined every wall, crammed with volumes of every shape and size. A grand staircase swept up to a second-floor gallery, and the only light came from green-shaded lamps on heavy wooden reading tables, casting pools of warm light in the cavernous space. "Welcome to the city's repository for unofficial history," Seraphine said, her voice a low murmur that was absorbed by the thousands of books. "Things that don't fit in the public record. Stories, spellbooks, genealogies of creatures you've only had nightmares about." A small, elderly man emerged from between two towering shelves. He had a fringe of white hair around a bald, shiny pate, and he wore a tweed jacket with elbow patches that looked older than I was. He peered at us over a pair of spectacles perched on the end of his nose. "Seraphine," he said, his voice a dry rustle of paper. "You're late, and you've brought a guest." "She's helping me with a small acquisition problem." Alistair's gaze settled on me, and it was unnervingly sharp. "So you're the one with the site, Cassandra's pet project. You reek of shadow magic and grimoire rot. Nasty business." He sniffed disapprovingly. "The key, then. I assume you're not here for a social call." "We need the lock," she said. Alistair's eyebrows, which were as bushy as his hair was sparse, shot up. "The lock? My dear girl, are you quite sure? That's permanent. Nothing else will hold it," she insisted. "He's breached my home, Alistair. He knows." The old librarian sighed, a world of weariness in the sound. "Very well, come along, and try not to touch anything. Some of these books bite." He led us through a maze of aisles, past shelves filled with artifacts that made my skin crawl. A jar containing what looked like a preserved human heart, a dagger carved from a single massive tooth, a music box that played a tuneless, discordant melody as we passed. He stopped at a plain, unassuming door at the very back of the Athenaeum. He produced a ring of keys and selected one that looked like a simple iron skeleton key. He inserted it into the lock, but before he turned it, he looked back at me. "You, investigator, your sight. Tell me what you see on this door." I focused. The door was just wood and iron, but to my sight, it was different. The wood around the lock wasn't wood. It was a swirling vortex of interwoven energies, a knot of impossibilities that my brain couldn't quite process. The lock wasn't a mechanism, it was a singularity. "It's not a door," I said slowly. "It's a place that looks like a door." "Good," Alistair grunted, approving. "At least your reputation isn't entirely hype." He turned the key. The door didn't swing open. It dissolved. One moment it was there, a solid barrier, and the next it was gone, replaced by an archway that revealed a room that shouldn't have existed. It was a perfect sphere, maybe 20 feet in diameter, with walls made of a smooth, gray, seamless stone that seemed to absorb all light. There was nothing inside the room. Nothing, except a single pedestal in the center, and on the pedestal, floating a few inches above its surface, was the key. It wasn't made of metal. It was a solid piece of obsidian, carved into an impossible Escher-like shape. It was a key that didn't look like it could ever fit into a lock, a Mobius strip of dark, glassy stone that seemed to bend the light around it. It wasn't just an object, it was an absence, a hole cut out of the world. Alistair gestured for Seraphine to enter. She walked towards the floating key, her movements reverent. I followed, a step behind. The air inside the sphere was cold and still, and the silence was absolute. A heavy, suffocating blanket. "The lock is made from a shard of a fallen star," Alistair explained from the doorway, not entering. "A piece of antimatter, or something close enough to it. It doesn't unlock things. It negates them. It will bind the magic of the grimoire, seal it away in a state of perfect stasis. Once it's locked, nothing can open it. Not even me. Not even her." Seraphine reached out for the obsidian key. As her fingers drew close, the air between them crackled with energy, a battle between her life magic and the key's absolute nullity. She touched it. She winced, as if from a static shock, and pulled it from its invisible suspension. "It's heavier than it looks," she murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. "He'll know you have it," Alistair said, his voice flat. "The moment you took it, every creature in this city that feeds on power felt the resonance, a silence that loud as a beacon of its own." "We don't have a choice," Seraphine said, turning back. She held the obsidian lock carefully, as if it might suddenly become intangible and slip through her fingers. "Thank you, Alistair. Just be gone from my library," the old man said, a flicker of genuine worry in his sharp eyes. "You've brought the storm to my doorstep, and my insurance doesn't cover acts of eldritch gods." We walked back through the silent aisles, the weight of the new key, a palpable pressure in the room. The grimoire, still tucked under Seraphine's arm, began to hum again, a low, anxious thrum that seemed to be in direct opposition to the cold stillness of the lock. Holding them both together felt like trying to fuse a living wire and a block of dry ice. As we stepped out of the Athenaeum and back onto the cobblestone street, the night air felt suddenly loud and aggressive. The distant city hum, the scuttling of a rat in the gutter, it was all too much after the profound silence of the vault. "You see," Seraphine said, her voice tight as she unlocked her car. He'll know we're moving, he'll know what we have." "Then we don't give him time to set a trap," I said, sliding into the passenger seat. "Where's this vault? How far?" "It's not a place of distance," she said, starting the engine. "It's a place of alignment. A point where the veils between worlds are thinnest, reinforced by old magic. We need to get there before he can figure out how to disrupt the alignment." She drove, not with speed, but with a fluid, weaving purpose, taking turns that seemed to make no geographical sense, doubling back, heading down one-way streets the wrong way, the city's logic bending to her will. My head was still aching, and my sight, now unclouded by the alabaster gentleman's spell, was a raw, buzzing nerve. The city's hidden architecture was laid bare to me, ley lines crisscrossing beneath the asphalt, shimmering wards on ancient buildings, the faint, sad ghosts of forgotten things clinging to street corners like damp newspaper. It was information overload, a migraine with a view. "Slow down," I finally muttered, pressing the heels of my hands into my eye sockets. "The world is too loud." "Sorry," she said, her voice softening. "I forget. Here." She reached over and tapped a small, smooth gray stone set into the dashboard. It was the same type of river stone she'd given me. The moment her fingers touched it, a wave of calm washed over the interior of the car. The cacophony in my head didn't disappear, but it receded, the edges softening from a jagged scream to a dull, manageable roar. I could breathe again. "Thanks," I said, dropping my hands into my lap. "You have to learn to control it," she said, her eyes on the road. "Not just block it out. The sight is a muscle. You've been letting it run wild. You need to teach it when to flex and when to rest." "And you're the coach?" I asked, a familiar, sarcastic retort. But it lacked its usual bite. "I'm the one who put you in the game," she countered, a hint of her own steel returning. "The least I can do is throw you a towel." We drove into a part of the city I didn't recognize. The buildings fell away, replaced by a sprawling, dark park. This was the city's old heart, a forgotten landscape of ancient trees and overgrown paths, a remnant of a wilder world that had been paved over and built upon. This was the Weeping Woods, a place locals told ghost stories about, a place teenagers dared each other to spend a night. I'd always dismissed it as folklore. Seraphine parked the car on a patch of gravel at the edge of the woods, the engine's purr cutting off into a profound silence. The only sounds were the whisper of wind through the trees and the distant, lonely cry of a train horn. "The entrance is in there," she said, her gaze fixed on the impenetrable wall of darkness between the ancient oaks. "It's not a door you can see, not until you're in the right place at the right time. And the right time is now." She got out, the grimoire tucked under one arm, the obsidian lock held carefully in her other hand. I followed, my every nerve ending humming. The air was different here. Cooler, older. It smelled of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else. Something metallic and clean, like the air after a lightning strike. "This way," she said, and struck off into the woods, moving with an unnerving confidence. I stumbled after her, my boots sinking into the soft, mulchy ground. The trees here were giants, their branches intertwining high overhead to form a dense canopy that blocked out the moonlight, plunging us into a near-total darkness. I pulled out my phone, but the flashlight app just sputtered and died. "No technology," Seraphine's voice echoed back to me. "It confuses the alignment." "Great," I muttered. "Luddite magic." My sight, now that my senses were deprived of normal light, began to compensate. The forest didn't just appear dark, it began to glow with a soft internal luminescence. The veins in the leaves pulsed with a faint green light. The roots of the trees glowed like buried rivers of phosphorescence. The entire forest was a single, slow-breathing organism. Then I saw the other lights, small pale glimmers drifting between the trees like will-o'-the-wisps. They weren't part of the forest's natural glow. They were visitors, spirits, ghosts, remnants. "They're drawn to the convergence," Seraphine explained, her voice a low whisper that didn't disturb the wood slumber. "They can feel the veil thinning. Some are just curious. Others are hoping to slip through." One of the glimmers drifted closer, resolving into the shape of a woman in a flapper dress, her form translucent and wavering. She had no face, just a smooth, blank oval where her features should be. She drifted past me, and I felt a wave of profound, chilling sorrow. a grief so old and deep it had worn away her identity. I shivered and pulled my jacket tighter. "Don't let them touch you," Seraphine warned. "They'll try to latch on, to find an anchor in the world of the living. They're not malicious, just desperate." I stuck close behind her, weaving through the glowing trees. The path she followed was invisible to me, but she never hesitated. We walked for what felt like an hour, the silence growing deeper and more profound. The grimoire in her arm began to vibrate, a low, anxious hum that resonated in my bones. The obsidian lock in her other hand seemed to drink in the ambient light, a tiny, perfect void. Then she stopped. We were in a small, circular clearing. The trees around it were the oldest I had ever seen, their bark like fissured stone. In the center of the clearing was a single, massive, flat-topped boulder, covered in moss and ancient carvings that had been worn almost smooth by the elements. "This is it," she breathed, her voice filled with awe. "The keystone." She stepped onto the boulder, her movements slow and deliberate. As her feet touched the stone, the carvings began to glow with a soft blue light. The air grew thick, humming with a power that made the hair on my arms stand up. The wispy spirits drifted away from the clearing, as if repelled by an unseen force. "It's opening," she said, her eyes closed. She held up the grimoire and the obsidian lock. The two objects began to react, the grimoire's green light pulsing against the lock's black nullity. The air between them began to shimmer and warp. "You need to stay back," she said, her voice strained. "The process is volatile." A jagged line of pure, black emptiness appeared in the middle of the clearing, a crack in the fabric of reality. It wasn't a door, it was a wound. And from that wound, a cold, dead emptiness began to seep into the world. The grimoire hummed louder, a frantic, desperate plea. The lock remained inert, a perfect, silent void. Seraphine stood between them, her face a mask of concentration, her body trembling with the effort. "It's not working," she gasped, her voice tight with pain. "The lock, it's rejecting the book. The magic is too chaotic." The crack in the air widened and the cold emptiness intensified. I could feel it pulling at me, a hungry, seductive void. It promised silence, an end to the noise, an end to the pain, an end to the sight. "Morgan," Seraphine cried out, her voice barely a whisper. "Help me." I didn't know what to do. I was just a mortal, a spectator to this epic battle of magic. But I was the only one there. I had to do something. I thought of the grimoire, of the brief, overwhelming connection I'd felt with it on the docks. I thought of the life that had poured into me. I thought of the green vine, the curious tendril reaching out to me. I didn't have magic, but I had understanding. I had a connection. I took a step forward, onto the boulder. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the clearing. "Over here?" The grimoire's frantic humming shifted, its wild energy focusing on me. It remembered me. It trusted me. The cold emptiness from the crack in the air washed over me, a wave of pure nihilism. It was the same feeling I had weaponized against the alabaster gentleman, the oppressive weight of entropy. It was a promise of an end. For a second I wanted it. I wanted the silence. Then I thought of the old woman's warning. The price is always higher than you think. I thought of my lost memory, the ghost of a sunny day by the lake. I thought of the anger, the cold fire it had left behind. That was my anchor. That was my end. No one else's. Get away from her, I roared, a primal surge of protectiveness overriding my own despair. I didn't have a weapon, a spell, a plan. All I had was myself. I lunged, not for the book or the key, but for Seraphine, tackling her around the waist and pulling her away from the center of the stone. The moment her concentration broke, the connection was severed. The grimoire and the obsidian lock clattered to the stone, their energy snapping apart like a broken rubber band. The crack in the air didn't just close, it imploded, the vacuum sucking in a shock wave of pure force that threw us both off the boulder. We landed hard in a heap of limbs and damp moss. The world was a spinning, chaotic mess of pain and disorientation. I could hear Seraphine gasping for breath beside me. I pushed myself up, my head throbbing, my vision swimming. The clearing was empty. The grimoire was gone. The obsidian lock was gone. And standing in their place, smiling that beautiful, chilling smile, was the alabaster gentleman. He wasn't holding the book or the key. He was just standing there, immaculate in his white suit, as if he'd been waiting for a bus. The only sign that anything had happened was a faint, shimmering distortion in the air around him, like heat haze off summer asphalt. A valiant effort, he said, his smooth, cultured voice a stark contrast to the violence of the moments before. Truly. But you seem to have a fundamental misunderstanding, Miss Cross. You can't fight a conclusion. You can only negotiate its terms. I scrambled to my feet, pulling my 38. It was useless, and I knew it, but it was all I had. What did you do? Me? He spread his hands in a gesture of mock innocence. I did nothing. I simply waited for you to fail, which you did spectacularly, I might add. You provided the final push of chaotic energy needed to destabilize the alignment. The vault rejected you. The magic simply dispersed. Liar, Seraphine said, pushing herself up, her face pale but her violet eyes burning with fury. You broke the seal. A semantic distinction, he said with a dismissive wave. The result is the same. The key is adrift, and the lock is shattered into 1,000 pieces of unreality, scattered across the city. A rather messy outcome, but not without its opportunities. He looked at me, his winter sky eyes glinting. And you, Miss Cross, you were the catalyst. Your emotional outburst, that raw, untamed, mortal desperation. It was the perfect wedge. He was toying with us. He had been watching through whatever residual connection he still had, or through some other means I couldn't fathom. He had let us get to the very precipice, only to pull the rug out at the last second. Where is the book? I snarls, leveling the pistol. His smile widened. Ah, the eternal question. It's no longer a book, you see. Without the lock to contain it, without the alignment to focus it, its purpose has fractured. The Verdant Key is no longer a single entity. It has become dispersed. What does that mean? Seraphine demanded, stepping up beside me, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, green light faintly glowing around her knuckles. It means the city is about to become a very interesting place, he said, a note of genuine excitement in his voice. The magic has to go somewhere. The life has to find a vessel. The book is shattered. Its pages are on the wind. Its chapters are taking root. You're not looking for one book anymore, Miss Cross. You're looking for a story. A story that is writing itself across the face of the city. One impossible bloom, one feral creature, one patch of impossible wilderness at a time. He turned and began to walk away, fading slowly into the deep shadows between the ancient trees. This is your doing, Seraphine called after him, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and despair. You'll corrupt everything you touch. I'm merely a gardener, he called back, his voice already seeming to come from a great distance. And I've just planted a very big seed. Happy hunting. And then he was gone. The silence of the woods rushed back in, but it was a different silence now. A waiting silence. A pregnant silence. The air was charged with a new potential. A taut, humming tension. I lowered my gun, the barrel cold and heavy in my hand. The anger was gone, replaced by a hollow, sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. He hadn't just escaped, he'd won. And he'd turned my own weapon, my desperate, flawed humanity against me. He's lying, I said, the words sounding weak even to me. He has to have it. He's not, Seraphine whispered, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She looked down at her empty hands. I can't feel it. The connection, it's just gone. Not blocked, not hidden. Gone, fractured. She looked up at me, her violet eyes wide with a fear that went deeper than any anger. He's right, Morgan. The book is everywhere. And nowhere. My head was still a mess, the after-image of the failed ritual, a jagged scar across my senses. But through the pain, something new was happening. My sight wasn't just buzzing. It was blooming. The glowing forest around us seemed to pulse in time with my own heartbeat. I could feel the latent life in the soil, the slow, patient growth of the roots, the slumbering potential in every seed. I could feel the magic the alabaster gentleman had released. It was a virulent, chaotic wave, and it was already spreading out from this spot, a ripple of impossible reality. He's not just winning, I said, my voice low and tight. He's changing the rules of the game. Seraphine looked at me, really looked at me, and a flicker of understanding crossed her face. Your sight? It's different. The connection you made with the grimoire, the ritual, it did something to you. It did something to everything, I corrected. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the woods with a new clarity. The book isn't just a book, it's a source code, and he just copy-pasted it into the city's operating system. The analogy felt right. The magic wasn't just creating a few magical weeds. It was rewriting the base programming of our reality. The Weeping Woods had always been a liminal space, a place thin between worlds. It was patient zero. We have to go back, Seraphine said, her voice regaining its edge of steel. To the Athenium? Alistair might know how to patch this. We can't, I said, my gaze fixed on a tree about 50 yards away. Its leaves were still, but the trunk was shimmering. The bark was flowing, not like liquid, but like a river of wood and moss, its patterns shifting and rearranging themselves into a new, more complex architecture. The city is sick, Seraphine. We can't just run to the library to look up the cure. We're in the quarantine zone. A sudden rustle in the undergrowth made us both freeze. I raised the .38 instinctively. A creature emerged from behind a thicket of ferns. It was a deer, but not like any deer I'd ever seen. Its fur was the color of moss, and its antlers weren't bone but a living, twisting lattice of wood and vine from which small, glowing blue flowers bloomed. It looked at us with eyes that were pools of liquid, intelligent gold. There was no malice in it, only a profound, otherworldly calm. It took a delicate step, then another, its hooves making no sound on the forest floor. It was a piece of a fairy tale, walking through the real world. Then another one joined it, and another. A small herd of the impossible deer emerged from the woods, their glowing antlers casting a soft, ethereal light on the mossy ground. They moved with a silent, collective purpose, not grazing, but patrolling. They were guardians. They're beautiful, Seraphine whispered, a tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. They're so beautiful. Her grief was a palpable thing, a sorrow for the loss of a purity she had dedicated her life to protecting. They're also a problem, I said, my voice grim. What happens when one of those wanders onto the expressway, or when a hunter sees it? She flinched as if I'd struck her. The world is changing, Morgan. We have to change with it. The world doesn't get a vote, I shot back. People will see these things, they'll panic. The city will lock down. They'll bring in flamethrowers and tranquilizer guns. This ends in blood and fire. We can't let that happen. My sight was reaching farther now, pushing past the clearing. I could feel it. The magic wasn't just spreading. It was anchoring. The grimoire's essence wasn't just a wave. It was seeding. It was finding places in the city that resonated with its nature and taking root. Places of decay and neglect, abandoned places, forgotten places, and other places too. Places of memory, of intense emotion. There, I said, pointing not with my finger, but with my focus. I closed my eyes, letting the connection pull me. He's not just making monsters, he's making oases. The book is trying to go home. It's trying to turn the city into a forest. I saw it in my mind's eye. A vision layered over the reality of the woods. A flash of an alley downtown, the brick walls crumbling, not from age but from the pressure of life bursting from within. a rooftop covered not in gravel and tar but in a lush, impossible garden. The magic was fracturing, yes, but each shard was a seed, a tiny fragment of the Verdant Key trying to fulfill its purpose. We have to find them, I said, opening my eyes. The urgency was a fire in my blood. The fragments. Before he does. Who? Seraphine asked, her mind still grappling with the scale of the failure. Him, I said, the alabaster gentleman. He's not just planting seeds, he's going to harvest them. He wants the power, but he wants it contained. He's going to try to reforge the key on his own terms. He let it shatter so he could pick up the pieces he wanted and discard the rest. It was a chillingly logical plan. Why steal a book when you could steal its power, piece by piece, leaving the chaotic, uncontrollable bits to run wild and create a diversion? We need a base, I said, my mind already working, shifting from the immediate problem to the long game. A place to work, a place that's shielded. My office was out. Her place was compromised. My car, Seraphine said, her practicality cutting through her despair. She looked at the silent, watching herd of moss deer. It's warded. Not against this, not completely, but it's a start. We can use my phone, call Alistair. He might not be able to fix this, but he's the best historian we have. If anyone can make sense of how a grimoire like this fractures, he can. She was right. Information was our only weapon now. We moved carefully, keeping our distance from the spectral herd. They watched us go, their golden eyes unblinking, silent sentinels of a new age. The car was exactly where we left it, a sleek, mundane island of normalcy in the growing sea of weird. The moment we were inside, Seraphine tapped the dashboard stone again, and the muted calm returned, a bubble of quiet sanity against the roaring chaos outside. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. I just watched the woods, the glowing roots, the breathing leaves, the ghost light of the spirits. It was all so beautiful. And it was all a symptom of a disease that was, right this second, burrowing into the heart of my city. Alistair didn't answer. The call went straight to a voicemail that was just a clipped automated recording. No. She tried again, same result. He always answers, she said, her voice tight with worry. He's never away from the Athenaeum. Maybe the ripple hit him, I said. A library full of magical artifacts and forgotten knowledge that's kindling for a fire like this. Seraphine's face went pale. She started the car, the engine's quiet purr sounding aggressive in the newfound tension. Hold on. She drove, but the journey was different this time. The city wasn't just a backdrop anymore. It was an active participant. The ley lines I had only faintly perceived before were now blazing rivers of light beneath the streets. She had to swerve to avoid a pothole that for a split second my sight registered as a gaping, two-blind maw in the asphalt. We drove past a skyscraper that seemed to breathe, its glass facade rippling like the surface of a pond. The world was glitching. When we finally screeched to a halt in front of the Athenaeum, we knew why Alistair hadn't answered. The place was no longer a repository of history, it was a living one. The soot-stained brick of the townhouse was gone. The building was now a colossal living tree. Its trunk was the size of a city bus, and its bark was a swirling tapestry of old leather and wood, the words from the books within now literally carved into its flesh. Its branches, thick as ancient oaks, reached high into the night sky, heavy with glowing leaves that pulsed with a soft golden light. The door wasn't a door anymore, but a knothole, sealed shut with a plug of wood that looked disturbingly like a face, its mouth frozen in a silent scream. "Oh no!" Seraphine breathed, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. "Oh, Alistair, you foolish, glorious man." The magic had found a perfect anchor, a place packed with the concentrated history and knowledge of centuries. The Athenaeum hadn't just been infected, it had become the heartwood of the new wild. "What do we do?" I asked, my mind refusing to process the sheer impossibility of it. Do we knock? We go in, she said, her jaw set. Alistair would have tried to contain it. He would have gone to the most secure place he had, the vault where the lock was kept. If we can get to him, he might have a log, a record, something that can tell us where the other fragments went. Getting in was easier said than done. The wood of the trunk was as hard as stone. Seraphine pressed her hands against it, channeling her energy. But the living tree just absorbed it, a deep green glow spreading from her palms and vanishing into the wood. It's too strong, she grunted. It's feeding on the power of all those books. I can't break it. I pressed my own hand against the bark. The connection was immediate and overwhelming. I wasn't just touching a tree, I was touching the library. I could feel the whispers of 1,000 stories, the rage of 1,000 curses, the sorrow of 1,000 forgotten souls. It was a cacophony of narrative. Then I felt something else. A thread of familiar, dry, rustling annoyance. Alistair, I said, closing my eyes and focusing on that single, discordant note. He's in the center, the sphere room. He's alive. Then we make a door, Seraphine declared. She reached back into the car and pulled out a tire iron. Let's see if it's fireproof. She swung the tire iron with a strength that belied her frame. It struck the wood with a deafening thwack that sent splinters flying. But the wound she made began to heal instantly, new fibers weaving together to seal the gash. It's regenerating, I said, my sight watching the process. You can't break your way in, you have to. Ask. Ask what? I didn't know. I just acted on instinct, the same way I had when I touched the grimoire. I placed my palm flat against the bark next to the healing gash. I didn't try to force my will on it. I didn't try to command it. I simply reached out with the part of me that now understood its language. I didn't speak. I thought. We mean no harm. We come to tend to the gardener. Let us in. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the wood beneath my hand began to shift. It didn't splinter or break, it flowed. Fibers spun and rewove themselves, pulling apart to form a perfectly round, man-sized opening. Beyond it, there was no building interior. There was a tunnel of living wood, pulsing with a soft golden light. Seraphine stared at the opening, then at me, her violet eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning respect. How did you do that? I have a library card now, I said grimly, and stepped inside. The tunnel closed behind us, sealing us in the heart of the tree. The air was warm and smelled of old paper and sap. The walls were lined with shelves, but the books on them were no longer paper and leather. They were growing, their pages broad, flat leaves, their words veins of darker green. They were living texts. The center of the tree was a massive, open space, a high-ceilinged rotunda. The sphere room was still there, but it was different. The seamless gray stone was now a rough-hewn chamber, the walls the gnarled, living wood of the tree itself. And in the center, standing on what was left of the pedestal, was Alistair. He was half man, half tree. One of his legs was rooted into the floor, a mass of thick, woody tendrils. The arm on that same side was a branching limb, its twigs sprouting small green leaves. His face was still mostly human, but his skin had the texture of bark, and the hair on his head was a crown of moss. His remaining human hand was clutching a massive leather-bound tome, its pages still normal paper. He was using it to shield himself from the grimoire fragment that was floating in the center of the room. It wasn't the whole book. It was just one piece, a single leather-bound cover, its pages fluttering in a wind that wasn't there. The wood of the cover was alive, and from it, vines were growing, snaking across the floor and walls, their leaves glowing with the same golden light as the rest of the tree. This fragment was the heart, the seed from which the entire Athenium tree had grown. Alistair, Seraphine breathed, her voice filled with horror. The old librarian's head, a lumpy knot of wood and flesh, turned toward us. His single, human eye, magnified by his spectacles, focused on us. "Took you long enough," he rasped, his voice a dry creak of branches. was in the middle of something, a spot of light gardening. The fragment in the center of the room pulsed, and another vine shot out, this one tipped with a thorn that looked like obsidian. Alistair slapped it away with the heavy tome he was holding. Pesky thing, very aggressive, but full of marvelous data. Did you know this particular strain of symbiotic magic has a preference for anchoring to places of accumulated narrative potential? Fascinating. He was losing his mind, but he was also our only hope. Alistair, we need to know where the other fragments went, I said, stepping forward. The alabaster gentleman is going to try and collect them. We need to find them first. Them, he cackled, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. There is no them. There is only it. It's a gestalt, a consciousness. Fractured, yes, but still connected. It speaks, if you know how to listen. His gaze drifted to me, and for a second the leafy branches of his new arm seemed to reach toward me. You know how to listen. You're the one it reached for, the one it imprinted on. The memory of the green vine touching my finger, the world blooming inside my head, came back to me. I was a walking receiver for this chaos. Can you track them? I pressed, ignoring the implication. Track them? My dear girl, I am a tracking device, he said, tapping the woody trunk of his leg. The entire city is singing the song now, a chaotic, dissonant, utterly beautiful symphony. But your friend, the pale man, he's trying to conduct, to force the melody into a minor key. He's not just looking for the pieces, he's pruning them, destroying the ones he deems imperfect. That was the plan. The chaos wasn't just a diversion, it was a selection process. The alabaster gentleman was letting the grimoire's raw power manifest, then culling the results, harvesting only the strongest, most stable manifestations for his collection. He has a head start, Seraphine said, her urgency cutting through the madness. Where would he go first, Alistair? Which fragment is the strongest, the most valuable? The librarian's eye glazed over, as if he were listening to a distant signal. There's a strong one, a deep one. It's not blooming, it's dreaming. It's gone to the roots. The old places. The places the city forgot it had. He focused on me, his gaze sharp and terrifyingly lucid. The old transit tunnels. Beneath the financial district, that's where he'll be. He's looking for the book's memory, its history. The seed, I said, understanding dawning. The book remembers the forest it came from. It's trying to recreate it. A seed that remembers the sun, Alistair whispered, a flash of ancient poetry in his grating voice. Go before he finds it. The city can't withstand a memory that powerful. Not yet. He looked down at his rooted leg, a flicker of profound sadness in his eye. I can't go. My borrowing period has become indefinite. He's right, Seraphine said, her face a mask of resolve. We can't stay here. This place is a fortress, but it's also a cage. And it's not our fight. Not directly. She turned to me. The tunnels. We can get to them from the old courthouse. There are maintenance shafts that connect to the decommissioned line. The journey back was a blur. The city was accelerating in its metamorphosis. We passed a public square where a fountain had frozen into a crystal sculpture of a weeping willow, its tears of water hanging in the air like glass beads. The car's wards kept the immediate weirdness at bay, but beyond the windshield, reality was coming apart at the seams. The old courthouse was a monolith of granite and marble, a place of law and order, now a bulwark against the encroaching chaos. The lights were on, but the building was empty, evacuated in the face of the inexplicable phenomena popping up across the city. Inside, the silence was heavy and unnerving. The polished marble floors reflected our footsteps with an unnerving clarity. Seraphine found a maintenance panel behind a statue of a blindfolded justice. Inside, a ladder descended into absolute darkness. I'll go first, I said, my voice flat. This was my element. Not magic, not grand battles. The dark, forgotten places. The underbelly. I swung myself onto the ladder and began to descend. The metal was cold and slick with condensation. The air grew thick and heavy, smelling of rust, damp earth, and something else, something ancient and green. My sight didn't need light. The darkness was alive, swirling with the faint, glowing traces of ley lines, the city's ghost circulatory system. I dropped the last few feet into a puddle of icy water. The tunnel was a perfect circle of crumbling brick, stretching into darkness in both directions. The old tracks were still there, rusted into place. Seraphine dropped down behind me, her landing as silent as a cat's. "This way," I said, my instincts screaming. The hum of the magic was a palpable pull, a siren song from the deep. We moved in silence, our footsteps the only sound in the oppressive dark. The air grew warmer, more humid. The scent of green life intensified, an almost suffocating perfume. And then I saw it. Ahead, the tunnel wasn't a tunnel anymore. The brickwork had been consumed by a colossal, gnarled root system. The wood pulsed with a soft, internal light, and from its surface a carpet of phosphorescent moss glowed a vibrant blue. The tracks themselves were gone, replaced by a single, massive vine, thick as my torso, that snaked down the center of the passage, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic light like a resting artery. "The book's memory," Seraphine whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It's remembering a world before concrete." At the end of the transformed tunnel was a chamber. The tracks ended here, opening into a space that wasn't on any city map. It was a vast underground cavern, the ceiling supported by pillars of fused wood and stone. And the cavern was filled with trees. They were impossible, beautiful, and terrifying. Their trunks were pale, almost translucent, and they didn't need sunlight. They drew light and life from the air itself, their leaves glowing with the same soft internal luminescence as the moss. The floor was a soft, damp earth, covered in ferns that glowed with shifting patterns of light. It was a perfect, silent, subterranean forest. In the very center of this glowing grove stood a single, massive tree, older and larger than all the others, its branches reaching up like supplicating arms. This was the source. This was the fragment. And standing at its base, one pale hand resting on its glowing trunk, was the alabaster gentleman. He wasn't alone. Flanking him were two figures, things that might have once been human. They were tall and gaunt, clad in what looked like tattered dark business suits, but their skin was the color of dried mud and their fingers were long, sharp thorns. They stood perfectly still, their heads bowed like silent, malevolent topiary. "Ah, miss. Cross," the alabaster gentleman said, not turning. His voice was calm, conversational. "And Seraphine, how lovely of you to join me. I was just admiring the craftsmanship. This particular fragment is a masterpiece. It holds the book's genesis, the memory of the primordial forest." He finally turned, and his smile was that of a collector admiring a rare prize. "You've met my associates. I call them the gardeners. They're very good at pruning." The two figures lifted their heads. They had no faces, just smooth, featureless plains of mud flesh. "The memory," Seraphine said, her voice tight with fury and fear. "You're going to consume it, to understand the grimoire's source code from the inside out." "An astute if crudely phrased analysis," he conceded. "Knowledge is power, and this is the root of all knowledge for this particular artifact. Once I have absorbed this, the other fragments will be child's play to acquire." As if on cue, he placed both hands on the trunk of the central tree. The glowing of the forest intensified, the light pulsing in a frantic, desperate rhythm. A high-pitched, keening sound filled the cavern, a cry of pure, stolen life energy. The tree was in agony. The alabaster gentleman didn't flinch. He just stood there, a placid vampire, drinking it all in. One of the gardeners moved, its thorny feet making no sound on the soft earth. It glided toward us, its featureless face tilted in our direction. "Morgan," Seraphine warned, her hands beginning to glow with a furious green light. We can't let him complete the absorption. I wasn't looking at the gardener, I was looking at the tree. My sight was on fire. I could feel the connection, the same one I'd felt on the docks, but magnified 1,000 times. The tree wasn't just a memory, it was a mind. A vast, slow, dreaming consciousness. And it was screaming. The gardener was almost on us, its thorny hands raised. Seraphine threw a bolt of pure concussive force at it. The creature staggered, its mud-like body cracking, but it didn't fall. It just kept coming, relentless and emotionless. Their purpose is to absorb and neutralize threats, the alabaster gentleman called out, his strained the only sign of effort. Your magic is just an appetizer. I ignored them all. I focused on the tree, on the screaming consciousness. I reached out not with my hands, but with a strange new part of my mind. I didn't try to fight the pain. I tried to understand it. I offered it an anchor, a single, clear thought in the storm of its agony. I'm here. You are not alone. The keening in my head didn't stop, but it shifted. A new note entered the symphony of pain. Recognition. A single thread-like tendril of thought reached out and brushed against my mind. It was cold and fragile, like a frost-covered spiderweb. The cold of a world without sun, the deep, patient chill of ancient stone, the slow, eternal winter before the warmth of life. I gasped, falling to one knee. The gardener was 10 feet away. "Morgan!" Seraphine cried, throwing another bolt of energy. The gardener absorbed it this time, the green light sinking into its muddy flesh like water into sand. I had to do something. I had to break the connection. But how? I couldn't fight him. I couldn't fight him, creatures. I was the wrong tool for the job. Cold. The memory wasn't just a feeling. It was a weapon. The book remembered the cold, the entropy, the silence, the very thing the alabaster gentleman professed to serve. A desperate, insane idea bloomed in my mind. "Seraphine," I ground out, my teeth chattering from the ghost chill of the tree's memory. "Your magic. Give it to me." "What?" She stared at me, momentarily distracted from the approaching gardener. "I can't. It's not a battery to be passed around, it's part of me. Just do it," I yelled. "The opposite. Give me the opposite." She understood. Maybe she didn't understand the plan, but she understood the request. She pivoted, ignoring the gardener, and slammed her glowing hands onto the ground. "Vinculum," she shouted, a word of binding, of connection. A wave of green light erupted from her palms, not an attack, but an offering. It didn't strike me. It flowed into the earth, a river of life magic that snaked through the glowing moss and ferns, converging on my position. The power that flooded me wasn't a gentle stream, it was a fire hose. The warmth of 1,000 springs, the life force of a forest poured into my body. My own magic, the cold, nihilistic void inside me, screamed in protest. It was a war of opposites being waged in my soul. I was the battleground. The pain was blinding, a white-hot agony of being torn apart from the inside out. I could feel my own cells trying to simultaneously burst with life and crumble to dust. The gardener paused, confused by the new energy source. The alabaster gentleman's absorption faltered, his concentration broken by the raw, uncontrolled power I was channeling. I had to choose a side. I had to be a conductor, not a battleground. I clung to the ghost chill of the tree's memory. I fed it. I used Seraphine's fire to forge it into a weapon. I wasn't just a void anymore. I was an abyss, a place of absolute perfect zero that could receive infinite energy. I pushed back. The combined power, life and unlife, creation and decay, erupted from me not as a light, but as a wave of absolute silence. It was the cold from the docks, the pressure from the ritual, honed into a single focused point, a sphere of perfect negation. It hit the central tree. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The screaming in my head stopped, cut off as if with a knife. The glowing of the forest dimmed, not fading, but being extinguished. The light was being pulled into the tree, which now began to pulse with a cold black light. The luminescent leaves curled and turned to dust. The glowing ferns browned and withered. The alabaster gentleman shrieked, a raw, inhuman sound of fury and pain. The connection between him and the tree hadn't just been broken. It had been poisoned. He was no longer drinking life. He was being force-fed the memory of its absence. He staggered back, clutching his head, his perfect composure finally shattered. The gardener facing us didn't just fall apart. It unraveled. The mud flesh lost its cohesion, dissolving into a pile of damp earth and dead leaves. The other one simply collapsed, its thorny limbs clattering on the stone floor like dry twigs. The cavern went dark, save for the cold, black light pulsing from the tree, a dead star in the heart of the city. The memory was gone. The Genesis fragment was inert. I had sterilized it. I collapsed, my body racked with tremors. The foreign energy was gone, but the echoes of the conflict remained. I felt hollowed out, a cathedral after the organ has stopped playing. Seraphine was at my side in an instant, her arm around my shoulders, her other hand checking my pulse. "Morgan, my God, what did you do?" I tried to speak, but my throat was raw. I hit the delete key. The alabaster gentleman pulled himself to his feet. He was no longer smiling. His beautiful face was a mask of pure, cold rage. His winter sky eyes burned with a hate that was ancient and absolute. "You," he hissed, his voice a sliver of ice. "You pathetic little anomaly. You have no idea what you've done." "He saved my city," I croaked, pushing myself up with Seraphine's help. "You doomed it," he snarled. "You've cut out its heart." The memory fragment was the anchor. It was the template. Without it, the other pieces won't grow, they won't bloom, they'll rot, they'll fester. "You haven't pruned the garden, you salted the earth." He turned, his white suit a stark slash of pure white in the gloom. "Enjoy your victory, Miss Cross. Enjoy the decay you've unleashed." He didn't fade into the shadows this time. He simply folded. Space bent around him, and he was gone, leaving only the scent of winter and a profound, chilling emptiness. The silence he left behind was heavy and accusing. I looked at the dead tree, its branches bare and black against the gloom. I had won the battle. And he was right. I had just started a war. I had no idea how to fight. The journey back to the surface was a grim ascent. The ladder rungs felt slippery with failure. When I emerged into the courthouse's grand hall, the world outside had changed. The early morning light, filtering through the tall, grimy windows, was tinged with a sickly yellow. The city wasn't just glitching anymore. It was sick. "Drive," was all I could say to Seraphine as we got back to the car. We drove in a thick, tense silence. My sight was a blur of corrupted data. I saw a newsstand where the headlines on every paper were the same. A single, weeping eye. I saw a flock of pigeons that took flight, their wings not feathered but made of stained glass. The sunlight passing through them casting fractured, colorful shadows on the pavement before they shattered against the side of a building. The magic was no longer creative. It was cancerous, mutating, decaying. My head wasn't just hurting anymore. It was screaming. I could feel the rot, the psychic pain of 1,000 dying possibilities. The fragments of the grimoire, once seeds of life, were now tumors of corrupted memory. "We have to get off this street," Seraphine said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "My sanctuary is compromised. Your office is a death trap. We need somewhere neutral. Somewhere that doesn't have a strong enough identity to be corrupted." My thoughts were a maelstrom, but a single, hard-edged idea cut through the noise. A place that was a dead end. A place that was already a tomb. "The morgue," I said. She shot me a look. "The morgue? It's perfect," I insisted, the logic feeling desperate and solid. "It's a place of endings. No stories begin there. It's warded in its own way by bureaucracy and cold steel. And I hesitated. I know the medical examiner. She owes me a favor. That was an understatement. Dr. Anya Sharma and I went way back. I'd helped her close a case a few years back, identifying a poison that had stumped the state lab. She was a woman of science, of sharp scalpels and cold facts. Seeing her now, in this world of impossible woods and faceless mudmen, felt like a betrayal of everything she stood for. But I was out of options. We found her in her office, a sterile white room that smelled of disinfectant and burnt coffee. She was staring at a monitor, her face pale, her usual aura of brisk competence replaced by a deep-seated bewilderment. On her screen was a news report showing a time-lapse of a city intersection where the asphalt had buckled and a forest of crystalline, razor-sharp trees had erupted overnight. "Anya," I said, my voice rough. She looked up, her eyes widening when she saw me. "Morgan, thank God. I was about to call you. I have a body." She took in my disheveled state, the grim determination on my face, and Seraphine, who looked like a goddess of the battlefield who had stumbled into the wrong war. "What the hell is going on?" "We're trying to figure that out," I said, pulling up a chair. "The body. What's wrong with it?" "What's right with it?" she countered, swiping to a new set of photos. They showed a man on an autopsy table. He was naked, and his skin was covered in a fine, crystalline growth like a layer of frost. No ID, found in an alley downtown, no obvious cause of death, except he's turning into a geode. His internal organs are calcifying, crystallizing. I sent a sample to the lab. They came back and told me to stop wasting their time with jokes. The crystals are growing. They're a mineral that doesn't exist. My stomach turned. The rot, the decay, the alabaster gentleman's prophecy. "We need a place to work, Anya," I said, cutting to the chase. "Off the grid, just for a few hours." She studied me, her doctor's eyes taking in every detail, every cut and bruise, the bone-deep exhaustion that must have been radiating off me. She didn't ask what kind of trouble I was in. Anya Sharma dealt in the end of stories. She knew better than anyone that some questions had answers you didn't want to hear. "Examination room 3, she said finally. "It's empty. There's a terminal with a closed network. No one will bother you. There's a coffee machine down the hall. I suggest you use it." She paused, her gaze softening. "Morgan, be careful." "We will," I lied. Examination room 3 was a cavern of white tile and stainless steel. It was cold, impersonal, and utterly perfect. The sterile environment seemed to press back against the psychic noise, muffling it to a dull, bearable ache. The gurney in the center of the room was conspicuously empty. I sat down at the terminal, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "He was going to the roots," I said, thinking out loud. "The memory, the genesis. We stopped him from getting the most valuable piece. So what's his next move?" "He adapts," Seraphine said, pacing the room like a caged panther. "He's a creature of leverage and control. He lost the central prize. He won't risk a direct confrontation for the other fragments. He'll use his new pawns, those gardeners, and he'll find a new way to apply pressure." "On me," I said. It wasn't a question. I was the wrench in his works, the anomaly. "He can't get to you here," she said, her confidence a fragile shield. "This place is a null zone. Too much death, too much order. It has no story for him to corrupt." But she was wrong. He didn't need to corrupt the place. He just needed a messenger. A single, sharp knock echoed on the metal door of the examination room. Before we could react, the door swung open. Standing there wasn't a mud-faced gardener or a ghostly spirit. It was a courier. A young woman in a bright, jaunty uniform holding a small, cardboard box. "Package for Morgan Cross," she said, her voice cheerful and utterly out of place. "Signature required." I felt a knot of ice form in my stomach. I hadn't ordered anything. Seraphine moved in a blur of motion, placing herself between me and the door, her hands glowing faintly. Who sent it? The girl just blinked, her smile unwavering. I don't know. I just deliver the packages. She held out a data slate for a signature. Leave it, I said, my voice a low rasp. Sorry, she chirped. Company policy, I need a signature. I walked forward, my legs feeling like lead. I took the slate and scrawled my name across the screen. The courier didn't look at it. She just handed me the box, gave another bright, meaningless smile, and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the empty hall. The box was light. It had no return address. I brought it over to the stainless steel examination table and set it down. The three of us, me, Seraphine, and Anya, who had followed us in, stared at it like it was a bomb. It's just a box, Anya said, her practicality a small comfort. Open it, Seraphine urged, her gaze fixed on the cardboard. I took a scalpel from a nearby tray and carefully sliced through the packing tape. Inside, nestled in a bed of styrofoam peanuts, was a single object. A snow globe. It was an antique, the glass dome, cloudy with age. The scene inside was a miniature, perfect replica of my city. Little cars, little buildings. And in the center, a tiny, sculpted figure of a woman in a trench coat, kneeling on a miniature dock, clutching a book. It was me. It was the moment I had first touched the grimoire. As I stared at it, trapped in that tiny glass world, the snow globe began to shake on its own. The snow-fine white grains of plastic swirled up, obscuring the scene. But it wasn't snow. The white flakes were shimmering like ground-up diamond dust. They began to cling to the glass, swirling into a new pattern, a single coherent word written in a language that didn't exist but that I understood instantly. Watch, then. The scene inside the globe changed. The plastic snow settled, and the miniature cityscape dissolved. It was replaced by a new scene. A living room, cozy and warm, with a fireplace and a comfortable-looking sofa. A familiar living room, Anya's living room. And sitting on that sofa, a book in his lap, was Anya's husband, David. He looked up, his face a mask of terror, as the walls around him began to sprout thick. Thorny vines, the wood of the floorboards groaning as they warped and splintered. "No," Anya whispered, her face ashen. "No, it's not real. It's a trick." But I knew it was. My sight screamed confirmation. The snow globe wasn't just a message. It was a window, a live feed. The alabaster gentleman wasn't just sending a threat. He was delivering a performance. The alabaster gentleman's smooth, cultured voice filled the room, not from the globe, but from the very air around us, a whisper of ice against the steel. A demonstration, Miss Cross, a negotiation tactic. I find direct confrontation so messy. Leverage is so much more elegant. The image in the globe shifted again. It showed a hospital room, an old woman, frail and hooked up to a dozen machines, her face pale, my mother. The single, fragile anchor I had in this world. A single, perfect rose of black glass was blooming on the pillow beside her head. My blood ran cold. The anger, the cold fire I had learned to weaponize roared back to life. A white-hot inferno. "Bastard," I snarled. "He can't get to them," Anya stammered, her mind, a bastion of science, struggling to process the impossible. "They're safe. The hospital is secure." "Not from him," I said, my gaze locked on the tiny, trapped image of my mother. "He's not breaking down doors. He's bending the rules." "It's an illusion," Seraphine insisted, but her voice was tight with uncertainty. "He's showing you what you fear." "She's not in a hospital," I said, the words cracking. "She's in a long-term care facility. Green Hills. The name isn't on the public records. I paid to have it kept private. There was no way he could know." Then the realization hit me. A punch to the gut. He didn't need public records. He had the book's magic. He had the fragments, and the fragments were connected to the city's infrastructure, to databases, to power grids, to the hidden networks that governed our lives. He wasn't just a magical terrorist. He was a hacker, a data thief. He had found them. He was inside the system. This is a trap, Seraphine said, her mind finally catching up. He's showing us this to make us run, to draw us out. He doesn't need to draw us out, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I picked up the snow globe. It was cold, unnaturally so. He's just proving a point. He has us. He has everyone. I looked at Anya, her face a canvas of anguish and disbelief. He's not going to kill them, Anya. Not yet. That would be a waste of a good tool. He's going to wait. He's going to watch us scramble. I turned and, with a surge of pure, unadulterated rage, I threw the snow globe against the far wall. It didn't shatter. The glass simply vanished, and the plastic snow and the tiny sculpted figures dissolved into a puff of fine, shimmering dust that faded into the air. A chuckle echoed in the room, the sound seeming to come from the dust motes dancing in the fluorescent light. And now you're learning, Miss Cross. But you're still thinking in terms of attacks, of force. That's a game I've been playing for millennia. You cannot win. The image was gone, but the threat remained. A gaping wound in the center of the room. Anya had collapsed into a chair, her face in her hands, her entire world imploding. Anya, I said, my voice hard, stripping away the grief. Look at me. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and lost. He is not going to touch them, I said, the words a vow, not a reassurance. Because he wants the fragments more. He's using them as hostages to keep us busy, to keep us reactive. But he also needs to collect them. We can't save our people by running to them. We can only save them by taking away his power. How? Seraphine asked, her face a grim mask. There are dozens, maybe hundreds of fragments. We can't find them all, and the ones we do find are corrupting. My mind raced, a frantic search through the wreckage of the last 24 hours, the living books, the subterranean forest, the geode man. The alabaster gentleman was a collector. He curated. He wouldn't want a gallery full of rotting, chaotic art. He wanted control. He's not going to collect all the fragments, I said slowly, the pieces clicking into place with a chilling certainty. He's a purist. He's looking for the pure ones, the ones like the memory tree, the ones that still hold a coherent piece of the original. The corrupted ones. They're just noise, distractions, a chaotic smokescreen. So we look for the pure ones, Seraphine said. Find them before he does. And what about the others? Anya asked, her voice a hollow whisper. The ones that are turning people to glass? We can't save the city by pulling weeds one by one, I said. We have to kill the root. But the root is gone. I looked at my hands. They were trembling. I burned it. No, Seraphine said, her gaze intense. You didn't. You changed it. You introduced a paradox. You fed life force into a memory of absolute melody. You didn't delete the Genesis fragment, Morgan. You corrupted it. You made it a new kind of seed. A seed of entropy, not life. I hadn't destroyed it. I had made it something in my own image. A void. That's why the other fragments are rotting, I breathed. They're still connected. All the fragments are one entity, just distributed. My intervention sent a shockwave through the network. A virus that targets the book's magic, Seraphine finished, her eyes wide with the implications. The alabaster gentleman can't control the decay because you've introduced a variable he can't predict. He was right. I hadn't just salted the earth. I had become the poison. So we can't fight him on his terms, I said, my mind finally clearing. The chaotic mess of the last day sharpening into a single cold point of purpose. We can't just find the fragments. We have to accelerate the decay. We have to use my connection to spread the virus. To find every last piece of that book and rot it from the inside out. It was a terrifying plan. A scorched earth policy for the soul of the city. To save it, we had to finish what I had started. We had to become a plague. He'll try to stop you, Anya said, her scientist's mind grasping the horrific logic. If the fragments are what's anchoring this magic, and you're what's destroying them, then you are now the single greatest threat to his entire operation. He'll come for me directly, I said. He can't afford not to. And we need a weapon, Seraphine added, her practical nature reasserting itself. Something focused. You can't just wander around the city willing things to die. You need a delivery system, a focal point. My gaze drifted to the examination table, to the tray of stainless steel instruments. Scalpels, forceps, rib spreaders, tools of precision and dissection. I think, I said, picking up a long, thin steel probe, its tip wickedly sharp. I can make one. We couldn't stay in the morgue. Anya needed to get to her family, and Seraphine and I needed to move. She gave me a burner phone, a key to a small, anonymous storage unit she owned across town, and a look that held more weight than words. Be the plague, Morgan, she said, her voice hard as steel. Don't let it be you. We drove into the heart of the sick city. The corruption was spreading faster now. A skyscraper was weeping rivers of black tar that sizzled when it hit the pavement. A pack of stray dogs, their bodies fused together into a single writhing mass of fur and teeth, loped down an alleyway, their howls a chorus of madness. The yellow tinge in the sky had deepened to the color of a fresh bruise. The storage unit was exactly as advertised, a concrete box in a row of identical concrete boxes. Inside, among dusty boxes and forgotten furniture, Seraphine had a small arsenal of magical components. Salt, silver chains, vials of purified water, a set of intricately carved wooden runes. It was her version of a field kit. I sat on an overturned crate, holding the steel probe. I closed my eyes and reached inside myself to the cold, empty core that had been awakened. I thought of the void, of the sterile silence of the morgue, of the black light of the dead tree. I didn't just remember the feeling, I embraced it. I willed it into the metal. The probe grew impossibly cold in my hand. A fine layer of frost formed on my skin. When I opened my eyes, the instrument had changed. The steel was no longer shiny and reflective. It was a matte, seamless black, a sliver of pure, absolute non-existence. It seemed to absorb the light around it. The tip of the probe, once just sharp, now looked like it could cut a hole in reality itself. I had made a needle of entropy, a scalpel for reality, Seraphine murmured, a look of profound unease on her face. Gods help us. The burner phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You can't unring a bell, Ms. Cross, but you can try to catch the sound. The library is weeping. Come see what it's learned. It was him. A challenge. An invitation. The library, I said, showing her the phone. The Athenaeum? He's baiting you, she said immediately. He knows your connection to it. He also knows it's the single largest repository of knowledge in the city. If any of the fragments are going to manifest as something other than a monster, it'll be there. He's arrogant. He thinks he set a trap, but he might have just pointed us to the next target. Getting inside was a problem. The massive living tree that had once been a townhouse wasn't exactly taking visitors. But I wasn't a visitor anymore. I was part of its operating system. We parked a block away. The street was deserted. The silence broken only by the faint, creaking groan of the living library's branches against the night sky. I walked up to the great woody trunk and placed my new black probe against its bark. This time, I didn't ask. I commanded. I pushed the feeling of nullity, the essence of the virus, into the tree. The response wasn't an opening. It was a scream. A psychic shriek of 1,000 corrupted texts that I felt in my teeth. The wood around the probe didn't flow. It blackened and died, crumbling into dust. A hole appeared, edged in rot, leading into the dark interior. The inside was a nightmare. The living books were now diseased. Their leaves were spotted with necrosis. the words on their pages turning to black sludge that dripped onto the floor. The air was thick with the smell of decay. The golden light was gone, replaced by the sickly, pulsing black light from the central chamber, my own creation calling me home. We found him in the sphere room. Alistair was still there, but he had changed. He was no longer just rooted, he was being consumed. The black rot had spread up his wooden leg and across his torso. His one human eye was wide with a silent, eternal scream. The alabaster gentleman stood beside him, one hand on Alistair's branching arm. He wasn't absorbing life this time. He was absorbing the decay. He was drinking my poison. "Ah, here you are," he said, turning. His face was flushed, a feverish, excited gleam in his eyes. "And you brought your little pestilence. I have to thank you, Ms. Cross. I was struggling to find a stable interface. The pure life force was too chaotic. But this structured entropy, it's a much more robust operating system. You've created a universal adapter." He was using my attack as a weapon. He was learning from it. "I'm going to enjoy dissecting you," he continued, a genuine smile gracing his lips. "You're a truly fascinating specimen, a void that can think." He didn't summon gardeners. He simply raised a hand. The dead books around us began to stir. The rotting leaves whipped up into a frenzy, forming a swarm of razor-sharp blades that filled the air, their edges gleaming with my own black energy, a storm of my own making. Seraphine moved, her hands weaving a shield of green light that held the swarm at bay, the two energies crackling and hissing where they met. "I can't hold them," she grunted, the strain evident on her face. The black rot was anathema to her life magic. I didn't have to fight the swarm. I had to fight its conductor. I locked eyes with the alabaster gentleman and pushed. I didn't just push the virus. I pushed everything. The cold of the void, the pain of the Geode man, the horror of Anya's snow globe, the memory of my mother in that hospital bed. All the fear, all the anger, all the grief of the last 24 hours. I didn't aim it at him. I aimed it at Alistair. The effect was instantaneous. The librarian, a vessel already at the breaking point, became the bomb. The black rot inside him detonated. He didn't explode. He simply dissolved. One moment, he was a man-tree caught between two forces. The next, he was a cloud of black dust, a concentrated wave of pure entropy. It hit the alabaster gentleman dead center. He didn't scream. He just went offline. For a fraction of a second, the perfect, arrogant mask vanished, replaced by a look of pure, blank shock. His connection to the grimoire's network was severed. The swarm of dead leaves dissolved, raining down around us like a silent, black snow. In that instant of vulnerability, Seraphine acted. She didn't attack him. She threw a bolt of pure, golden light, not at the man, but at the floor beneath him. The stone cracked, and a fountain of raw, untamed earth energy erupted, a geyser of the city's own life force. It wasn't a weapon. It was a diversion, a chaotic blast of raw power that sent him stumbling back, disrupting whatever arcane equilibrium he was trying to regain. "Now, Morgan," she yelled. I ran, not toward him, not toward any of the exits. I ran for the pedestal in the center of the room, for the small, pulsating crystal. That was all that was left of the Genesis fragment. The black rot had eaten the tree, but it had coalesced its essence into the single, corrupted heartstone. This was the server, the mainframe. If he could interface with my virus through Alistair, I could interface with the entire network through this. It was a gamble. It could destroy me, but it was the only move left on the board. I slammed my black probe into the heartstone. I didn't just connect. I merged. The city didn't just scream in my head. It became my head. I was every flickering streetlight, every corroded pipe, every forgotten ghost story whispered in a dark alley. I was the ley lines. I was the concrete. I was the rot and the life beneath it. I could feel the fragments. not as a pull, but as a part of myself. Dozens of them. Hundreds. A constellation of corrupted stars scattered across the urban landscape. I felt the Alabster gentleman, too. He was a blight, a clean, precise line of code being written over my chaotic, organic mess. He was trying to regain control, to quarantine the virus, to subsume it. He was still connected, still fighting. I had to cut him off completely. There was no grand gesture, no spell, no incantation. There was only a choice, a single, absolute act of will. I took the cold, the void, the poison that was now my essence, and I pushed it out, not through one channel, but through all of them. I infected the entire network. From every point in the city where a fragment had taken root, a pulse of pure, silent entropy radiated outwards. I wasn't killing the fragments. I was transforming them. I was making them inert. The image bloomed in my mind, an overlay on the reality of the room. A skyscraper downtown, its windows crawling with glowing runes, went dark. A patch of park where the grass had turned to shimmering crystal crumbled back into dull earth. The feral, concrete-skinned rats I'd sensed in the tunnel simply stopped. Their chaotic life force extinguished, leaving behind only inert matter. I was a broadcast tower for the end of magic. The connection to the alabaster gentleman snapped. Not with a scream, but with a final clean click. He was gone. Cast out of the system. Locked out of the city's operating system. My consciousness reeled, slamming back into my body with the force of a physical impact. I was on my knees, my hands still clamped around the probe buried in the dead heartstone. I was shaking, a tremor so deep it felt like my very atoms were coming apart. My vision swam. The room was a blur of black, rotten green light. Seraphine was kneeling in front of me, her hands on my shoulders, her face a mask of fierce concern. "Morgan, pull back, disengage!" I tried. I couldn't. The probe was fused to the heartstone, and the heartstone was fused to me. The virus was no longer just a weapon I was wielding. It was a tether. I was the new source, the new anchor. "You have to break it," I gasped, the words tearing at my throat. "The probe? Cut the connection." She looked from my face to the black needle, her expression a battlefield of horror and understanding. "It might kill you. It might kill me if I don't," I rasped, the cold of the void spreading from the probe, creeping up my arms. She didn't hesitate. She drew a silver dagger from a sheath at her belt, its blade etched with runes that glowed with a faint, pure light. With a swift, silent motion, she brought it down not on the probe, but on the heartstone itself. The silver struck the black crystal. There was no sound, just a silent, concussive blast of pure, white energy. It was the reaction of total opposites, the void against the light, entropy against creation. The probe shattered in my hands. The heartstone exploded into a cloud of gray dust. The backlash hit me like a physical blow. It felt like a part of my soul had been ripped out. I cried out, a raw, guttural sound, and collapsed onto the floor. The world went gray, then black. I woke up to the smell of stale coffee and antiseptic. I was lying on a cot in a windowless room with concrete walls, a storage unit, the same one we'd been in before. My head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. But the screaming psychic noise was gone. The constant, low-level hum of 1,000 dying stories had been replaced by a profound and unsettling silence. I sat up, my muscles protesting. I was wearing a clean gray t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants that weren't mine. My leather coat and my .38 were folded neatly on a nearby crate. Seraphine was sitting in a folding chair watching me. She looked exhausted, the lines of strain around her eyes deeper than before. She held a mug of coffee in both hands. "You were out for 16 hours, she said, her voice quiet. "Did we win?" I asked, my own voice a hoarse croak. She considered the question for a long moment, her gaze distant. "He's gone," she said finally. The psychic signature he left all over the city is just gone. The fragments are inert. The rot has stopped. The nightmares have receded. That was the good news. I could feel it too. The city was quiet. The fever had broken. But, I prompted, knowing there was more. She took a sip of her coffee. You're gone too. At least, the part of you that was connected to it all. I can't feel the static anymore. The link to the book's network is severed. I looked down at my hands. They were just hands. Pale, a little scarred, but completely, utterly normal. The cold, the power, the void was gone. I was just Morgan Cross again. A private eye in a city that had almost ended and didn't even know it. The cost, I said, understanding dawning. The Athenium is dead, she said softly. The tree's still there, but it's just wood now. A bizarre petrified sculpture. Alistair is gone. Not dead, but erased. The dust settled, and there was nothing left. Alistair, the dry, brilliant, annoying old man who had loved his books more than anything. He was a casualty of my final desperate move. I pushed the grief down, burying it under a layer of cold, professional detachment. There would be time for that later, maybe. And the city? I asked. It's healing, she said. The impossible things are gone. The glass trees have crumbled. The faceless mudmen have dissolved back into sewer runoff. People are waking up this morning to a city that looks mostly normal. They're calling it the glitch. A mass hallucination brought on by a contaminant in the water supply, a gas leak from a forgotten subway line, anything to avoid the truth. Anya? I asked, the name a lump in my throat. I called her from a payphone, Seraphine said. Used a code word we agreed on years ago. She's fine. Her husband is fine. Your mother is fine. The threats, they vanished the moment he was locked out. He can't touch them anymore. The relief was so intense it was almost painful. I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me. For the first time in days, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to uncoil. We had won. We had paid a terrible price, but we had won. What do we tell them? I asked, opening my eyes. The people who lost things, who saw things they can't explain. We don't, Seraphine said, her expression hardening. They'll tell themselves stories. They'll find their own explanations. It's better that way. The truth is a burden they don't have to carry. She stood up and walked over to a small portable radio on another crate. She turned it on, and the room was filled with the sound of a morning news report, the anchor's voice cheerful and impossibly bright. Officials are calling the phenomenon the glitch, attributing the widespread power outages and bizarre visual disturbances to a cascading failure in the city's aging power grid. While emergency services have reported dozens of calls regarding structural anomalies and unusual wildlife, authorities are urging citizens to remain calm and report any lingering issues to the new city hotline. Mayor Thornton is scheduled to give a press conference this afternoon, assuring the public that the situation is under control. Seraphine clicked the radio off. The silence rushed back in, heavier and more absolute than before. A lie to soothe the masses, I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. Unnecessary lie, she corrected. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a wound is to cover it up and let it heal in the dark. I swung my legs off the cot and stood up. My body ached with a deep, bone-deep weariness, but my mind was clear. Sharper than it had been in years. The constant static that had been the background noise of my life since I was a child was gone. In its place was a silence so profound it felt like a new kind of sound. I was finally, truly, alone in my own head. I need my coat, I said. Seraphine didn't ask why. She just nodded. There's one more thing, she said, her tone shifting. While you were out, I went back to the docks, the clearing where it all started. I froze, my hand hovering over my leather coat. What was there? Nothing, she said. And everything, the magic is gone, but it left a scar. A perfect circle of earth, about 50 feet across, where nothing will grow. The grass is dead, the soil is sterile, and anything left there, a fallen leaf, a discarded bottle, just dissolves. Over a few hours, it turns to dust. The void, my signature. I hadn't just destroyed the magic, I had left a stain, a permanent monument to nothing. "I'll take care of it," I said. The words a promise I had no idea how to keep. I put on my coat. The weight of it, the familiar smell of worn leather and stale cigarette smoke, was a comfort. A tether to the world I understood. I holstered my .38 at the small of my back, the familiar pressure a solid, real presence. I felt like myself again. A hollowed-out, haunted version of myself, but myself nonetheless. "Where will you go?" Seraphine asked. I looked around the concrete box. My office was gone. My city was scarred. The one person who might have understood the science behind all this had a husband to protect and a life to rebuild. I was on my own again. "Home," I said, though the word felt strange on my tongue. My office was exactly as I'd left it. The blinds were drawn, the air was thick with the ghosts of old coffee and cheaper whiskey. The stack of unpaid bills was still on my desk, a monument to a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Everything was normal. Terribly, crushingly normal. I poured myself 3 fingers of the cheap stuff and sat down in my worn-out leather chair. I didn't turn on the lights, I just sat in the dark, and I listened. I listened to the city. And for the first time, I heard nothing. No ghosts in the wires, no whispers in the plumbing, no faint psychic echo of a lover's quarrel from the apartment next door. The city was just concrete and glass and steel. A collection of buildings and roads and pipelines, a machine. And I was just a woman in a room holding a glass of cheap whiskey. I had gotten what I thought I always wanted: silence. It was hell. My gaze fell on the stack of mail. Bills, junk mail. A plain manila envelope with no stamp, no return address. Just my name typed in neat, impersonal letters. I knew what it was before I opened it. I had seen one before in a morgue, a lifetime ago. I slid out the contents. Not a snow globe this time. A single black feather. It was cool to the touch, impossibly smooth, and it seemed to drink the light of the room. And underneath it, a small, crisp card. On one side, a single perfect circle of ink, a drawing of a scar on the earth. On the other, written in the same elegant, unhurried script: "The wound is a door. I'll see you on the other side." He wasn't gone. He wasn't locked out. He was just waiting. The virus hadn't destroyed him. It had forced him to adapt, to change. He wasn't a hacker in the system anymore. He was the architect of the void it left behind. He was learning to live in the silence I had created. I crumpled the card in my fist, the cheap paper crackling. The feather I placed carefully on my desk. It was a message, a declaration. The game wasn't over. He had just changed the board. I didn't sleep. I walked the city as dawn broke, a ghost haunting the waking world. I saw the sanitation crews power washing the black tar from the streets, the city workers patching the buckled asphalt. I saw people line up for coffee, their conversations filled with nervous, dismissive laughter about the glitch, about the strange dreams, about the feeling of being washed. They were healing, they were forgetting. But I could still see the scars. The scar on the docks wasn't the only one. As I walked, my newfound sight, not of magic, but of absence, showed me more. A dead patch of grass in a park where a child's swing set had sprouted metal thorns. A dark, permanent oil stain on the pavement of a parking garage where a car had twisted itself into a knot of screaming metal. These weren't magical wounds. They were voids. Places where reality had been so badly bent, it had snapped, leaving a permanent hole. The alabaster gentleman wasn't just sending me a message. He was marking territory. He was building a kingdom in the ruins. A kingdom of nothing. I had a choice. I could ignore it. I could try to go back to my life of tracking cheating husbands and skipping bail bonds. I could pour my whiskey and stare at my bills and pretend the world was sane. Or I could go back to the beginning, to the first scar. The docks at sunrise were desolate and beautiful, the water a sheet of hammered gold. The place where the book had been found, where my world had ended, was exactly as Seraphine had described. A perfect circle of dead earth, maybe 50 feet across, where even the tenacious weeds of the city refused to grow. It was an ugly, impossible wound in the fabric of the world. The edges of the circle were so sharp and defined it looked like it had been cut out with a laser. I stood at the edge, the feather from the envelope clutched in my hand. I was an anomaly, a void that could think. He had said so. And now he was inviting me to explore the full extent of that condition. I stepped across the line. There was no sensation, no flash of light, no dizzying fall. The world simply changed. The gentle dawn light vanished, replaced by a gray, sourceless twilight. The sound of the distant city, the cry of gulls, the lapping of water, all of it was gone. The silence was absolute, not the peaceful silence of an empty room, but the profound, suffocating silence of a vacuum. I was still standing on the docks. The pier, the water, the distant silhouette of the city were all still there. But they were desaturated. All the color had been reached out of the world, leaving behind a monochrome landscape of grays. The air was still and cold, without the scent of salt or diesel fuel. It was a photograph of the world, drained of all life and essence. This was the other side, the space between spaces. The wound. I started walking, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the dead air. The feather in my hand began to hum, a low, resonant frequency that seemed to make my teeth ache. It was a compass. I followed its insistent pull deeper into the heart of the monochrome docks. The architecture of this place was wrong. A pile of fishing nets I passed wasn't made of rope, but of woven shadow. A metal storage container, when I glanced inside, didn't hold crates, but a perfect, impossible cubic yard of solid darkness. This wasn't just a scar. It was a new ecosystem, an ecology of nullity. The feather led me to the end of a long pier. There, standing at the very edge, where the gray water met a sky the color of a dead television screen, was a figure. It was tall and slender, dressed in a white suit that was still shockingly, brilliantly white against the endless gray. The alabaster gentleman. He turned as I approached, a smile of genuine welcome on his face. He looked healthier than I had ever seen him. The feverish excitement was gone, replaced by a profound, serene calm. He belonged here. "Morgan," he said, his voice no longer a whisper of ice, but a clear, resonant tone that fitted the strange acoustics of this place. "I'm so glad you accepted my invitation. I was worried you might try to ignore the door once you found it." "It's hard to ignore a hole in the world," I said, my own voice sounding flat and dead. I held up the black feather. "You left this for me." "A key," he corrected gently. "Or perhaps a user manual." "You created a state, Miss Cross, a fundamental paradigm shift, but you didn't stick around to learn how to operate within it." A common mistake with artists. They're so focused on the act of creation, or in your case, uncreation, that they neglect the maintenance. "Cut the shit," I said, the familiar anger a welcome spark of heat in the cold. "What is this place?" "This," he gestured, taking in the gray, dead world with a sweep of his arm. "This is the silence you craved, the negative space, a clean slate. Reality is a messy, chaotic manuscript. So many edits, so many crossed-out words, so many marginalia. All I have ever done is try to find the final, perfect version. You, and your magnificent, clumsy rage, didn't just burn the library, you incinerated the concept of the paper it was written on. You've given me a blank page." He wasn't lying. I could feel it in the dead air. This place wasn't evil. It was empty. A canvas waiting for a painter. "And you're the artist?" I asked. "I am the curator," he corrected. "The restorer. I am going to take this raw, beautiful void and sculpt it into something perfect, something orderly. No more chaotic magic blooming where it shouldn't. No more messy emotions polluting the infrastructure. Just clean, elegant, silent structure. He began to walk toward me, his steps leaving no impression on the gray wood of the pier. And you, Morgan, you are the source, the wellspring. You didn't just create this place, you are intrinsically linked. You are the power source for my new creation. That's what the feather was for. A homing beacon. A tuning fork. He haven't just been inviting me into his kingdom. He'd been calling its god home. I won't help you, I said, my hand instinctively going to the small of my back, to the reassuring shape of my 38. It felt like a child's toy here. I'm not asking for your help, he said, stopping a few feet from me. His winter sky eyes were placid, but I could see the machinery turning behind them. I'm simply explaining your new function. You are the generator. I am the architect. Together, we can remake your city. Strip it of all its noise, all its pain, all its messy, pointless little stories. We can give it peace, the peace of the void. He raised a hand not to attack, but in a gesture of peace. Look around you, Morgan. No pain, no loss, no grief, no ghosts. Isn't that what you've always wanted? To be free of the noise? He was right. The silence was what I thought I wanted. But this wasn't silence, it was the absence of everything. A world without stories was a tomb. It's a cage, I said. A beautiful, gray cage. It's a sanctuary, he countered, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. And you were supposed to be its high priestess. But I see you are still attached, still clinging to the wreckage. He sighed, a sound like wind whistling through a tomb. A pity. We could have done such beautiful work together. He didn't move, but the world did. The gray water at the end of the pier began to churn, not into waves, but into a vortex of pure, solid blackness. From the vortex, a shape rose. It was made of the same monochrome nothingness as the rest of this world, but it was sharper, more defined. A creature of perfect geometric angles and razor edges. It had no face, no limbs, just a sleek, predatory shape that promised not pain, but erasure. I had hoped to do this the easy way, the alabaster gentleman said, his voice tinged with a genuine sadness. That you insist on being a difficult muse, no matter. Every great work of art requires a certain amount of force. The creature glided toward me, silent and swift. I drew my gun. The motion felt absurdly slow, clumsy. I fired. The bullet, a tiny, noisy piece of the real world, flew toward the creature. It didn't hit it, it simply vanished. As if it had passed into a dimension where matter no longer mattered, the creature was on me. I didn't have time to scream. It didn't strike me. It simply passed through me. The cold was beyond anything I had ever imagined. It wasn't the cold of winter, or the void I had carried inside me. It was the cold of a star that had died 1 billion years ago. It was the cold of entropy given form. I felt my thoughts slow, my memories drain away. The image of Anya's face, the feel of Seraphine's hand on my shoulder, the cheap whiskey burning my throat. They all faded, turning to gray dust before they could fully form. I was being unmade. My story was being edited out of existence. I fell to my knees, my body refusing to obey me. The gun slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the pier, the sound impossibly loud in the dead world. The creature hovered over me, a shark made of absence. A shame, the alabaster gentleman murmured, watching with detached interest. All that lovely, messy chaos reduced to a single, silent zero. But as my consciousness frayed, a memory fought its way to the surface. Not a big one. A small, stupid, insignificant detail. The smell of the coffee Anya had made in the morgue. The bitter, burnt aroma. It was a detail so mundane, so utterly real that it didn't belong here. It was an error in the code, a bit of corrupted data that this perfect, sterile world couldn't process. The coffee is burnt. The thought was a rock and a river of nothing. An anchor. I clung to it. I focused on the burnt smell, on the memory of the chipped ceramic mug, on the warmth of it in my hands. I wasn't trying to bring my magic back. I didn't have any. I was trying to bring back me. The stubborn, annoying, coffee-drinking, private eye. The cold around me receded, just a fraction. It was like standing in a blizzard and suddenly finding a single warm match. The creature of angles hesitated. Its perfect form flickered. "Impressive," the alabaster gentleman said, a note of curiosity in his voice, a defiance of entropy, a memory asserting its own existence. "How quaint." He raised his hand again. This time the gray wood of the pier began to change. It didn't sprout thorns or vines. It liquefied, flowing like mercury, forming tendrils that snaked toward me. They weren't trying to kill me. They were trying to integrate me, to absorb my stubborn little anomaly into the greater quiet. I had to fight back, but I had no power. I had no weapons. I only had the story. My story. I thought of my mother, not the image of her in the hospital bed, which was his weapon, but a different memory. Her laughing in a sun-drenched kitchen, her hands covered in flour as she tried to teach me how to bake a pie. The warmth of the sun on the linoleum, the smell of cinnamon and apples, a memory that was pure, uncomplicated, and entirely mine. The tendrils of mercury wood stopped a foot away from me, shimmering as if confused by the sudden influx of life. "Stop it," the alabaster gentleman said, his voice losing its calm. "You're polluting the canvas. These messy, irrelevant little anecdotes, they're noise." He was right. They were noise. And this place was a void, so I would give it noise. I reached for another memory. The first case I ever cracked. The greasy taste of a diner burger I'd eaten while on a stakeout, the scratchy wool of a terrible suit I'd owned in my 20s. The lyrics to a stupid pop song that got stuck in my head for a week. I threw them at the gray world, not as weapons, but as facts. Irrefutable, unchangeable, solid little chunks of a life that had been lived. The world began to fight back. The gray water churned, and more geometric shapes rose from it. The sky darkened from dead television gray to a bruised, angry black. The temperature plummeted. He was trying to overwrite my noise with a greater silence. "Everything is a story, Morgan," he shouted, his composure finally cracking. "Even silence is a story. You can't win by adding footnotes." He was wrong. He was thinking like a collector, a curator. He wanted to display the story. I just had to live it. I pulled the trigger. Again, I had my 38 in my hand. I didn't remember picking it up. It was just there, a part of me. An extension of my will. I didn't aim at the creature or the alabaster gentleman. I aimed at the world. I fired at the gray, dead water. The bullet vanished again. But this time, something else happened. The gun didn't just fire lead and gunpowder. It fired the memory attached to it. The memory of the alley behind my office, the smell of stale beer and damp brick, the slick feel of the pavement under my shoes, the memory of a fight, of pain, of survival. A violent, ugly, beautiful piece of my story. The place where the bullet vanished into the water. It rippled. Not a physical ripple, but a conceptual one. For a brief, brilliant second, the water was no longer gray. It was the murky, polluted brown of the city's river. A tiny, defiant island of reality in the sea of nullity. The creature of angles shrieked, a sound like grinding glass, its form flickering violently. The alabaster gentleman stared, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. "Kip, you're introducing variables. You're breaking the axioms." "That's me," I grunted, getting to my feet, my body still aching with the ghosts of the cold. "I'm the variable." I raised the gun again. He didn't give me the chance. With a snarl of pure rage, he lunged. He didn't use magic. He used himself. His white suit tore as his body contorted, shifting, becoming something lean and predatory, something carved from ice and fury. He was no longer a curator. He was the monster in the gallery. He was on me in a flash, his impossible strength slamming me back onto the pier. The gun was knocked from my hand. skittering away into the gray. His hands, no longer human, were like shards of obsidian wrapping around my throat. The cold returned, a focused, absolute pressure that was trying to shatter my skull from the inside. "You will be silent," he hissed, his face inches from mine, his beautiful features warped into a rictus of hate. "You will be a blank page." My vision tunneled. The memories were freezing, turning to slush. The smell of coffee, the feel of flour, the taste of whiskey, all of it was being erased. He was stronger. His emptiness was purer than my noise. My fingers scrabbled against the gray wood of the pier, searching for something, anything. My hand brushed against the black feather I had dropped. I grabbed it. The connection wasn't a hum this time. It was a jolt, a circuit completing. I wasn't just holding a key, I was holding the power cord for this entire dead world. He was trying to unmake me with the void, but the void was plugged into me. He was so focused on erasing my mind, he forgot about my body. With the last of my strength, I jammed the feather into his eye. There was no scream. There was no blood. There was only a silent, cataclysmic implosion. The feather, a perfect tool for focusing and manipulating the void, found a new source. Not me, not the alabaster gentleman's control. It found the raw, unfiltered paradox of his existence, a being of ultimate order trying to wield the power of ultimate chaos. For a single, eternal moment, he became the focal point. He became the wound. The light that flared from him was the most color this world had ever seen. It was a blinding, perfect white, the light of a star being born in reverse. I was thrown back, the pressure on my throat vanishing. I shielded my eyes, the after-image burning on my retinas. When I lowered my hand, he was gone. The alabaster gentleman, the collector, the courtator, the would-be god of silence, had been deleted, but I had made a fatal error. I hadn't just killed him, I had used him to overwrite the operating system. I had given the void a final, perfect command. Erase. The gray world began to crumble, not with a bang, but with a quiet, inexorable certainty. The edges of the pier were blurring, dissolving into a haze of nothing. The geometric creatures of angles turned to dust and blew away in a wind that didn't exist. The water was receding, not flowing back into a river, but simply ceasing to be. This place, my scar on the world, was closing, and I was still inside. I didn't hesitate. I ran. I scrambled for my .38, snatching it up from the dissolving boards, and sprinted back the way I came. The world was coming apart behind me, a silent tide of erasure licking at my heels. I could feel the boundary, the place where my reality had ended and his had begun. I ran for it, a lone, stubborn footnote racing the delete key. I leapt. The transition was sickening. I slammed back into the real world like a car hitting a wall. The sudden sensory overload was a physical assault. The warmth of the rising sun on my skin, the sharp scent of salt, the raucous cry of a gullet was all too loud, too bright, too much. I collapsed onto the worn wooden planks of the real pier, my body heaving, gasping for air like a drowning man. I lay there for a long time, just breathing. The sun was higher now. A beautiful, normal, perfectly unmagical morning. Fishermen were mending their nets down the way. A ferry horn blared in the distance. The world was alive. I looked back at the place where the wound had been. It was gone. The perfect circle of dead earth, the scar, the door to the void, it had all vanished. In its place was just a patch of ordinary weathered dock, looking no different from the rest. I hadn't just closed the door, I had boarded it up, burned the house down, and salted the earth where it stood. I got slowly to my feet, my body a symphony of aches and pains. I was alive. The city was safe. And the silence was finally, truly, just silence. A victory, by any sane metric. So why did I feel like I had just lost everything that mattered? My office was still a mess. The cheap whiskey was still waiting. I poured a glass, but I didn't drink it. I just sat in the dark, the 38 on my desk next to the black feather. They were the only proof that the last few days had happened at all. The scars on the city were gone. The memories were fading. The glitch was just a weird news story people were already tired of talking about. The road was healing, and in the process, it was forgetting me. I was an artifact from a war that no one would remember. A weapon without a war. A week later, the phone rang. It was the same old rotary, its jangle as jarring as ever. I let it ring twice before I picked up. Cross. Morgan. Anya. Her voice was tight, professional, but I could hear the strain underneath. "Everything okay?" I asked, a knot of ice forming in my stomach. "It's fine," she said, a little too quickly. "David is fine. Everything is normal." She paused, and I could hear her take a breath. "That's why I'm calling. I have something I need you to look at, something that isn't normal." My grip on the receiver tightened. "What is it?" "It's a body," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "A DOA from the East Precinct. No ID. No obvious cause of death. No injuries, no toxins, no signs of struggle. He's just empty. The coroner says it's like something hollowed him out from the inside. He said the cells are disorganized, like they forgot how to be human." The silence on the line was heavy, thick with unspoken implications. It couldn't be. Not again. "Anya, the magic is gone. I made sure of it. The book is gone, Morgan," she corrected, her tone precise. "The fragments are gone. The book is gone. The fragments are gone. The book is gone." But whatever this is, it didn't come from the outside. It feels local, residual. "I'll be there," I said, my mind already racing. "No," she said, her tone firm. "Not here. Too many questions. Bring Seraphine. Meet me at the old textile mill on the waterfront. Bay 4. The body's in a cold storage unit there. Off the books." The line went dead. I stared at the phone. Local. Residual. An echo. I didn't like the sound of that. I found Seraphine in her greenhouse tending to a sickly-looking orchid. The plant wasn't just dying, it was slowly turning to fine, gray dust. The decay unnaturally ordered. She looked up as I entered, her expression weary. "I know," she said, before I could even speak. "I felt it. A week ago. Ah, tremor." "In the quiet. The quiet isn't as quiet as we thought," I said. She stood up, wiping dirt from her hands. "The void doesn't just create nothingness, Morgan. It creates a vacuum. And nature abhors a vacuum. Something will always rush in to fill the emptiness." The textile mill was a skeleton of rust and broken glass, a monument to a forgotten industry. Inside Bay 4, the air was cold and smelled of rust and refrigerant. Anya was already there, leaning against a stainless steel drawer. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharp as surgical scalpels. She didn't waste words. She pulled open the drawer. He was a man, mid-40s, with a face that was plain and unmemorable. He was lying there, looking peaceful. Too peaceful. His skin had a waxy, translucent quality, like old parchment. Anya was right. He looked hollowed out. Seraphine circled the slab, her hands glowing faintly. "There's no life residue," she murmured. "No echo of a soul, no psychic imprint. It's like he was never alive, just a biological shell." "I need to see his clothes," I said. Anya pointed to a sealed evidence bag on a nearby table. Inside was a cheap suit, a wallet, and a crumpled piece of paper. I put on a pair of gloves and emptied the contents onto the steel table. The wallet had the usual things: a driver's license for a John Doe, a few credit cards, a faded photo of a smiling woman. The paper was a receipt from a coffee shop. The date was yesterday. I read the name of the place, The Daily Grind. I knew it. It was a chain, sterile and ubiquitous, with a dozen locations across the city. But the address on the receipt wasn't just any address. It was the one on the corner of 5th and Elm. My blood ran cold. That was my block, my coffee shop, the place where I bought my burnt beans every morning, my territory. Find out everything you can about him, I said to Anya, my voice flat. Job, family, last known associates. I want to know what he ate for breakfast last Tuesday. He didn't eat anything, Morgan, Anya said softly. The talk screen came back negative for everything. No food, no water. His stomach was empty. He hadn't eaten in days, at least. But the receipt was from yesterday. He had bought a black coffee, no sugar. He didn't drink it, I said, my mind clicking through the possibilities. He bought it and he left. I left Seraphine and Anya to their work. I drove to the coffee shop. It was a sterile box of beige formica and the smell of scorched milk. The teenager behind the counter looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Hi, I said, flashing a badge I'd pocketed from a careless detective years ago. I'm looking into a John Doe. This was on him. I showed him the receipt. The kid glanced at it, bored. Yeah, so we get like 1,000 people a day. This one was special, I said, my tone hardening. He's dead. He was in here yesterday. Tall guy, brown hair, probably looked a little lost. The kid's face paled. Oh, yeah, I think I remember him. Yeah, he ordered a black coffee, paid exact change, just stood there for a minute staring at the cup, then he turned around and left. Didn't even take a sip. Did he talk to anyone? Just the girl at the next table, the kid said, pointing. He said something to her. I thought it was weird, 'cause she was a regular, always in here. Just sits, staring out the window. I followed the kid's gesture to a small table by the window. It was empty now, but on the surface, etched with a fingernail, was a single, jagged symbol. It wasn't magical, it was a glyph of pure, geometric absence, a piece of the other world. Graffiti tagged onto mine. It was a calling card, and it was a message. This wasn't random, this was targeted. The hollowed-out man wasn't a victim. He was a scout, a probe, sent into my world to test the defenses, to see if anyone noticed. And someone had. The girl at the table. She wasn't a victim. She was a witness. And now, she was a target. The kid didn't know her name. Just that she was in there every day at the same time. I knew what I had to do. I went back to the office, the black feather a cold weight in my pocket. The silence of the city was no longer a peace. It was a loaded gun waiting to go off. The next day I was back in the coffee shop. I sat at a different table, a newspaper open in front of me, my coffee untouched. I waited. She came in at 10:17 a.m., just like the kid said. She was young, maybe 20. She wore a faded band t-shirt and ripped jeans. She had headphones in her ears, and she carried a worn paperback. She looked like a million other girls in this city. She ordered a tea, took the same table by the window, and proceeded to ignore the world. I watched her for an hour. She didn't move. She didn't turn a page of her book. She just stared out the window, her expression placid, empty. She was a beautiful, human-shaped doll. Then it happened. The air around her shimmered, just for a second, like heat off asphalt. And in that instant, her face changed. The placid mask was replaced by a look of pure, abject terror. Her mouth opened in a silent scream. Her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on the table. It was over in a flash. Then she was back to staring out the window, placid as ever. But I had seen it. I had seen the ghost in the machine. I waited until she got up to leave. I followed her out onto the street. Excuse me, I said, my voice low. She turned, her eyes wide and vacant. Do I know you? I don't think so, I said. But I think you might be in trouble. A flicker of something crossed her face. Fear. Not for herself, but for me. You shouldn't have seen that, she whispered, her eyes darting around the crowded sidewalk. You're not supposed to see. See what? I asked, playing dumb. You looked like you saw a ghost. Worse, she said, her voice barely audible. I see the seams, the places where the world doesn't fit together right. Ever since the glitch. The quiet, it's not quiet. It's not quiet. It's a hum, a frequency. And sometimes things bleed through. Things from the other place. The other place. My place. They're looking for you, she said, her gaze locked on mine. The empty men. They're drawn to people like me, people who can still hear the noise. They think you're the source, the echo. The world narrowed to a single point. The alabaster gentleman was gone, but he had left behind a philosophy, an operating system. And someone else had installed it. You need to come with me, I said. She shook her head, a look of utter despair on her face. It's too late. I'm a beacon. They've already marked me. She held up her arm. On the inside of her wrist was a small, pale scar, shaped like the symbol on the table. They're coming to collect. Before I could react, she turned and ran, disappearing into the throng of pedestrians. I started after her, but it was no use. She was gone. I went back to my office. The city wasn't safe. The silence wasn't a peace. It was a hunting ground. I was the prey. And I had just stumbled upon the bait. The phone rang again. I knew who it would be before I answered. It was Anya. Get over here, she said, her voice tight with panic. Now, bring Seraphine. The body, it's gone. The textile mill was the same. Cold, rust-streaked, and empty. The stainless steel drawer where the hollow man had been was open. And empty. It's impossible, Anya said, her face pale with shock. This bay is sealed. There's only one key, and I have it. No one could have gotten in. Someone did, Seraphine said, her gaze sweeping the room. She wasn't looking for footprints or signs of forced entry. She was looking for traces. And they didn't just take the body, they took the memory of it. She was right. The faint, unsettling emptiness that had clung to the drawer, the psychic residue of the hollow man, was gone. The space was clean, sterile, wiped. I looked down at the steel drawer, and there, etched into the cold metal, was another symbol, the same one from the coffee shop, a signature. They're cleaning up their mistakes, I said. And they're sending a message. The message was clear. They were organized, they were methodical, and they were rewriting the world to suit their needs. They were the alabaster gentleman's disciples, the inheritors of his silence. And they were learning to use my void. I found the girl, whose name I learned was Maya, hiding in a library of all places. A place of stories, in a city that was trying to forget. She was huddled in a corner in the mythology section, her arms wrapped around her knees, rocking back and forth. They're here, she whispered as I approached. I can feel them. They're quiet. So quiet. They're not quiet, I said, my hand resting on the grip of my .38. They're just good at hiding. You need to tell me everything you know. She told me about the empty men. They weren't ghosts. They were echoes, remnants of people who had gotten too close to the void during the glitch. They had been hollowed out, their souls erased, but their bodies remained. And now they were being puppeted. By what, she didn't know. A signal, a broadcast, a command from the silence. They're collecting us, she said, her eyes wide with terror. The sensitive ones, the ones who can still hear the hum. They're taking us somewhere, to the center. The place where the wound had been, but that was gone, wasn't it? As if in answer to my unspoken question, the lights in the library flickered. Not a power surge. It was something else. The world seemed to stutter. For a fraction of a second, the books on the shelves lost their color, their titles fading into anonymous gray blocks. Then just as quickly, they were back. No one else in the library seemed to notice. They kept reading, their heads bent over their books, oblivious. But I saw it, and so did Maya. She let out a choked sob. It's getting stronger. The override. They weren't just in our world. They were trying to replace it. Suddenly, a book flew off a shelf across the aisle, crashing to the floor. Then another, and another, and another. A dozen books launched themselves into the air, their pages flapping wildly, their spines cracking. It wasn't a poltergeist. It was a distraction. I grabbed Maya's arm. We have to go. We ran for the exit, the storm of paper and chaos raging behind us. As we burst out onto the street, I saw them, 3 figures standing across the road, perfectly still. They were dressed in cheap, ill-fitting suits. Their faces were blank, their eyes empty. They weren't the gardeners of mud and bone. They were worse. They were blanks, human-shaped voids. The one in the center raised a hand, not at me, at Maya. Her body went rigid. A thin, high-pitched hum filled the air, a sound that grated on the teeth. A line of pale gray light began to form on her wrist, tracing the outline of the scar she already had. "No," I yelled, pulling her behind me. I drew my gun. This was my territory. My city. These things had no right here. I fired. Not at the lead, empty man. I aimed for the fire escape on the building next to him. The bullet struck the metal with a deafening clang, a loud, ugly, violent noise in the sterile silence they were trying to create. The effect was immediate. The empty men flinched, not from the bullet, but from the noise. The humming stopped. The gray light on Maya's wrist faded. For a second, they were just 3 men in cheap suits, looking lost and confused on a busy street corner. I didn't wait for them to recover. I hauled Maya toward my car, shoving her into the passenger seat. I peeled away from the curb, the tires screeching in protest. In the rearview mirror, I saw the 3 figures turn as one, their blank faces tracking us with an unnerving, inhuman stillness. They were learning, adapting. I didn't take her to the storage unit. That was compromised. I took her to my office, the one place in this city that was still unequivocally mine. Anya and Seraphine were already there, their faces grim. "The mill wasn't the only one," Seraphine said as soon as I walked in. 3 other off-book sites. The evidence from the glitch, the fragments we managed to secure. It's all gone. Wiped clean. They're erasing their own history. "They're not just erasing it," I said, pushing Maya toward a chair. "They're rewriting it. They're called the Empty Men, and they're collecting people like her." I gestured to Maya, "the ones who can still hear the echo." Anya knelt in front of the terrified girl, her movements practiced and calm. "Maya, is it? I'm Dr. Ivanova. Can you tell me about the hum? What does it feel like?" "Like a song with no notes," she whispered, hugging herself. "It's getting louder. It wants to fill the empty spaces." "Where is it coming from?" Seraphine asked, her glowing hands hovering over the girl's head, scanning. "I don't know," Maya sobbed. "It's everywhere, but it's strongest west, down by the water, near the old transit hub." The transit hub. A massive, abandoned labyrinth of train tunnels and bus depots, 100 years old. A perfect place to get lost. A perfect place to build a new world in the darkness. "They're building a server," I said, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening finality. The alabaster gentleman wanted to sculpt the void. These things, they're trying to turn it into a network, a broadcast tower. And they're using the sensitive ones as antennas. Anya looked up from Maya, her expression grim. "They're not just antennas, Morgan. They're components. That's what they're doing at the hub. They're assembling something." The floorboards of my office suddenly creaked, not from my weight, from the building itself. A low, resonant vibration hummed up through the soles of my shoes. The glass in my office door shimmered, the reflection of the neon sign across the street wavering, losing its color for a second before snapping back. "They're here," Maya whispered, her eyes wide with terror. A slow, deliberate knock echoed from my office door, not a client's hesitant rap, not a cop's authoritative thump. 3 perfectly spaced, identical knocks. The sound of a machine pretending to be human. I drew my 38. Seraphine's hands flared with light. Anya pulled a small silver syringe from her back and moved to shield Maya. The door swung open. 2 empty men stood in the doorway. They were the same ones from the street, their suits cheap, their faces blank canvases of humanity. But there was a difference. The air around them was distorted, like a heat haze. The very light seemed to bend around them, trying to fill the absence of their presence. They were more solid, more real. The one on the left took a step inside. "The subject, Maya," it said. Its voice was the worst thing I had ever heard. It wasn't one voice, but a chorus of 100 different voices, layered and compressed into a single, flat monotone. It was the sound of a crowd speaking with one dead mouth. "She is required for the harmony." "Get out of my office," I said, my own voice a low growl. "You're trespassing." "This jurisdiction is in arrears," the second empty man stated, its head tilting at an unnatural angle. "It is slated for sanitization. All variables will be nullified." Sanitization. Nullified. They weren't just speaking anymore. They were reading from the source code of the void. "Sanitize this," Seraphine snarled, and unleashed a bolt of golden energy. It wasn't a gentle, probing light this time. It was a spear of pure, untamed life force. It struck the lead, empty man square in the chest. The effect was not what we expected. There was no explosion of light, no scream of 1,000 souls. The bolt simply vanished, absorbed. The empty man didn't even flinch. For a split second, the outline of its suit glowed with a faint gray light, a perfect geometric honeycomb pattern. Then it faded. The attack had been debugged. "They've adapted to magic," Anya breathed, her face a mask of disbelief. "They're using the void as a firewall." My turn. My magic was gone, but I still had the most fundamental tool in my arsenal. I raised my 38 and fired, not at their heads, but at their feet. The bullets ricocheted off the worn linoleum with a deafening roar, the noise of violent, shattering intrusion in their sterile world. The empty men staggered back, not from pain, but from the sheer, chaotic unpredictability of the sound. The chorus of their voices broke, glitching into static for a moment. It was a weakness. They could process magic. They could rewrite physics, but they couldn't handle pure, meaningless noise. "Go," I yelled at Anya. "Take the back stairs. Now." Anya didn't hesitate. She grabbed a stunned Maya by the arm and hauled her toward the back of the office, toward the fire escape that clung to the brick wall like a metal vine. I fired 2 more shots, buying them seconds. The empty men recovered, their faces still impassive, but their movements were faster now, more aggressive. The one on the right lunged, its arm extending, fingers splayed. I didn't wait to see what it would do. I slammed my office door shut, dropped the heavy deadbolt, and fired a single shot through the wood, right at eye level. The splintered hole showed nothing but a distorted, shimmering void where the empty man's head should have been. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. Seraphine was at my side, her hands held ready. "They're not just men," she said, her voice tight. "They're terminals, walking dead ends in their network." "They're in the building," I said, as the floorboards began to vibrate again, a steady, rhythmic hum that resonated in my bones. "They're sanitizing." A loud crash came from the hallway. The sound of my neighbor's door being torn off its hinges. Mr. Henderson, a retired accountant who spent his days listening to baseball games on a crackly radio. "We can't let them get to Anya and Maya," I said. "They're the mission objectives." "No," Seraphine corrected, her gaze locked on the office door, which was starting to bow inward as if from an immense, silent pressure. "They're the payload." The door imploded. Not with a crash, but with a sickening, crumpling sigh of splintering wood. The 2 empty men stepped through the wreckage, and behind them, more. A dozen of them, spilling into the small space of my office, a silent gray army. The air grew thick and cold, the light from the neon sign outside dimming as it struggled to penetrate the crushing aura of their nothingness. "You are the source code anomaly," the chorus of voices said, speaking from all of them at once. "You must be quarantined and analyzed." They formed a semicircle, their blank faces turned toward me. The one in the center raised its hand. From its fingertips, thin, wispy tendrils of gray energy began to snake out, not at me, but at the room itself. They latched onto the file cabinets, the desk, the stacks of unpaid bills. The objects began to lose their color, their texture, their history, turning into dull, gray, indistinct shapes. They weren't just destroying my office, they were uninstalling it. "I have an idea," Seraphine said, her voice strained. "It's loud, it's stupid, and it'll probably bring the whole roof down on us." "I love it already," I grunted, raising my gun. "I'll handle the front," she said, her eyes beginning to glow with a light that wasn't just golden but furious, vibrant, chaotic. A star-going supernova. "You make sure Anya gets the package delivered." Before I could ask what that meant, she screamed. It wasn't a sound of fear, but a pure, sonic blast of raw power. The wave of golden energy washed over the empty men. They didn't absorb it this time. They flickered, their forms blurring, the chorus of their voices dissolving into a shriek of static. She wasn't using magic as a weapon. She was using it as a denial of service attack, flooding their local network with so much raw life it was crashing their systems. "Go!" she yelled over the roar. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and bolted for the back stairs, my feet pounding on the worn wooden steps. I could hear Anya and Maya scrambling above me. The hum of the sanitization process was a constant vibration in the walls, in the floor, in my teeth. I burst out onto the rickety iron landing of the fire escape, just as Anya was helping a trembling Maya over the railing. Below us, the alley was a narrow canyon of shadow and overflowing dumpsters. "Hurry," Anya urged. But it was too late. From the window of the office below us, a gray tendril of energy snaked out, wrapping around the iron leg of the fire escape. The metal groaned, a tortured sound. The entire structure shuddered, vibrating violently. Rivets popped. The rusted bolts holding it to the brick wall began to shear away. "We have to jump," I yelled, grabbing Anya's arm. "It's too far," she shouted back, her eyes wide with terror as she looked down the 4 stories to the unforgiving pavement. Then I saw it, the large green municipal dumpster directly below us. It was filled to the brim with black garbage bags. "It'll have to do," I said. "Anya, you go. I'll catch Maya." Anya didn't argue. With a desperate cry, she swung herself over the railing, pushing off into space. She hit the mound of garbage bags with a loud, sickening whump, disappearing into the trash. "You're next," I said to Maya, who was frozen with fear, her knuckles white on the rusted railing. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "I can't." "You have to," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "Think of the noise. Think of the ugliest, most chaotic, most real thing you can think of. A car crash. A scream. A baby crying. Hold on to it. It's your armor." She closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. Then she nodded. With my help, she swung her legs over the railing. I pushed her. She tumbled through the air, a small, fragile form against a brick backdrop. She hit the dumpster with a less than graceful thud, but she was in. The fire escape gave a final, catastrophic groan. The bolts on my side tore free. The entire structure swung out from the wall, hanging by a single screaming bracket. I was left dangling over the alley, clinging to the railing. Below me, Anya had extricated herself from the garbage and was helping a dazed Maya to the ground. "Jump, Morgan!" Anya screamed. The office window shattered. An empty man leaned out, its featureless face looking down at me. It raised its hand. I let go. The fall was short and brutal. I hit the edge of the dumpster, my shoulder exploding with pain before I tumbled into the stinking darkness of the bags. The impact drove the air from my lungs. For a moment, all I could do was lie there, gasping, the smell of rot and stale coffee filling my senses. A hand grabbed my arm, pulling me up. It was Anya. "We have to move. Now." As I scrambled over the side of the dumpster, my feet hitting the grimy pavement of the alley, I looked back. The fire escape had finally broken free, crashing to the ground in a shower of rust and twisted metal. The empty men were at the window, their blank faces staring down. They didn't try to follow, they just watched. "Where to?" I panted, clutching my bruised shoulder. "The hub," Anya said, her expression resolute. "It's the only way to stop this. We have to find the central server and shut it down." "We can't," Maya said, her voice small but firm. We all turned to her. She was standing straighter now, a look of terrified clarity in her eyes. "You can't just shut it down. It's not a computer. It's a choir. And they're trying to make me sing lead." The city was changing around us. The farther we got from my office, the more pronounced the glitches became. A passing bus flickered, its windows showing not the street, but a perfect gray void. The neon sign of a bar flickered, its red and blue letters dissolving into a monochrome haze for a second before snapping back. "They're expanding the network." Seraphine's ghost seemed to whisper in my mind. "They're overwriting the map with their own." We stole a car, a nondescript gray sedan that looked like it had already been forgotten by the world. As I drove, the city began to feel less and less familiar. The landmarks were there, but they were losing their character. The graffiti on the walls was fading, its vibrant colors replaced by uniform, sterile tags of the same gray symbol. The city wasn't just being sanitized, it was being homogenized. The transit hub was a monstrous structure of decaying concrete and rusted iron, a cathedral to a bygone era of industry. We parked a block away and approached on foot. The hum was overwhelming here. It was a physical presence in the air, a vibration that made my teeth ache and my bones feel hollow. The main entrance, a pair of immense bronze doors, was wide open. "It's a trap," I said, stating the obvious. "It's the only door," Anya countered. We stepped inside. The sheer scale of the place was breathtaking. A vaulted ceiling 100 feet high, arched over a cavernous space filled with the skeletal remains of trains and buses. But the space wasn't empty. They were everywhere, hundreds of them. A silent gray army standing perfectly still between the derelict vehicles. They lined the balconies of the upper levels. They stood on the catwalks. They were all facing the same direction, toward the center of the massive hall. And in the center, on a raised platform of concrete, was their church. It was a grotesque parody of a pipe organ. But the pipes weren't made of metal. They were made of people. A dozen men and women, their skin waxy and pale, their bodies contorted into impossible twisting shapes. They were the sensitive ones, the ones like Maya. Their hollowed-out bodies now served as conduits for the signal. And at the console, standing before a keyboard of bone and shadow, was the conductor. It wasn't one of the empty men. It was someone else. Someone I recognized. The teenage barista from the coffee shop. The one who had sold the hollow man his coffee. His face was still placid, so bored, but now there was something behind it. A cold, fast intelligence. He was the rootkit. The patient, Zero. "You're late," the barista said, his voice the same flat, monotone chorus of the others, but clearer, more focused. "The composition is almost complete. All that's left is to add the final note." He gestured to a single empty space on the organ, a spot on the far left meant for a new instrument, a new pipe. He was looking at Maya. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he continued, a flicker of something like pride in his dead eyes. "No more chaos, no more messy emotions, just a single, perfect chord of silence, sustained for eternity." The glitch wasn't a bug, Miss Cross. It was a preview. Anya stepped forward, her hands clenched. What have you done to these people? I have given them purpose, the barista said. I have unburdened them of the noise of self. They are now part of something greater. They are harmony. They're instruments in a funeral dirge. Seraphine's memory whispered in my mind. You can't fight harmony with more noise. You have to change the key. I looked at Maya. She was trembling, her eyes fixed on the human organ, a look of sheer, unadulterated horror on her face. But she wasn't just scared, she was listening. Her head was cocked to the side, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. I can hear it, she whispered. The song, it's sad, so sad, so sad. It's trying to remember something it forgot. The barista smiled, a ghastly, empty gesture. It remembers the peace of the void, the comfort of nullity. It misses being nothing. The army of empty men began to move, closing in around us, their movements slow, deliberate, synchronized. They were the firewall, the security detail. You can't stop it, the barista said, turning his attention back to the console. The final frequency is already being calibrated. Once she is integrated, the broadcast will be citywide, then worldwide, a global sanitization. I raised my .38, aiming it at his head. A useless gesture, and we both knew it. You can't fight a signal with a bullet, Miss Cross, he said, not even bothering to look at me. You can only make more noise. He was right. Bullets were just chaotic punctuation marks in a story they were about to erase. Magic was a language they had already learned to parse. We needed a new language, a new story. I looked at Anya. Her mind was a fortress of logic, a repository of medical knowledge, a sanctuary of science. I looked at the barista. His mind was a clean, sterile operating system, running a single, terrible program. And I looked at Maya. Her mind was a radio receiver, tuned to the frequency of the end of the world. My mind was a blank page, a scar, the source of all this, the anomaly. I had an idea. It was loud, stupid, and would probably get us all killed. Anya, I said, my voice low and urgent, I need you to be a doctor. She looked at me, confusion warring with the desperate logic of our situation. Morgan, what are you? Just do it, I cut her off. Find the flaw, the bug in the system, not in the magic. In them, the empty men. Look at them. Really look at them. She did. Her professional, analytical gaze swept over the silent gray figures surrounding us. She was no longer seeing a supernatural army. She was seeing a set of symptoms. Their posture, she murmured, her eyes narrowing. It's too perfect. No slouching, no shifting of weight. It's biomechanically efficient, but unsustainable. A human body can't maintain that kind of static load without microfractures, without joint degradation. They should be in agony. Their skin, she continued, her focus sharpening. It's not just pale, it's anemic, but there's no sign of blood loss. And their pupils, they're not just dilated, they're fixed, unresponsive to light. They're not just empty, they're non-functional. They're cadavers with a Wi-Fi connection. They're running on borrowed processing power, I said, understanding dawning. Their bodies are breaking down. The signal is the only thing holding them together. And the signal is being amplified by the organ, she finished, her eyes widening as she saw the whole horrifying picture. It's a feedback loop. The organ broadcasts a signal that powers the empty men, and the empty men, what do they contribute back? Maya answered, her voice a hollow echo. The silence, she whispered, their emptiness. It's the purest form of the signal. They're not just users. They're the bandwidth. They're the network. Everywhere I looked, I saw the seams of this reality, frayed and tearing. The army of the dead, the human organ, the bored god at the controls. This wasn't an invasion. It was a hostile takeover from within. So how do you crash a network that's made of nothing? I asked, my gaze fixing on the barista. He was the linchpin, the human rootkit. the one point where the code of the void had to interface with the messy, unreliable hardware of a person. You don't fight it with noise, you corrupt the file from the inside. Anya, I said, my decision made. The scar on my back, the one from the glitch. Her eyes flew to mine. Morgan, no. We don't know what kind of physiological feedback that could induce, connecting you directly to this. It's like touching a live wire to a pacemaker. That's the point, I said, turning to face the barista. He wants to add a final note. Let's give him a whole new damn symphony. Before she could protest further, I started walking, not charging, not running. I walked toward the platform, my 38 held loosely at my side. The empty men parted before me, their blank faces tracking my progress. They were programmed to contain, not to attack. Not yet. The barista finally turned from his console, a flicker of what might have been curiosity in his dead eyes. An unexpected development. The source code anomaly is approaching the core. This was not in the projection. I'm the variable, remember? I said, my voice calm. I'm here to debug your system. I climbed the concrete steps to the platform. Up close, the human organ was a thing of nightmare. I could see the faint gray energy pulsing through the contorted bodies, a sick, steady rhythm that vibrated in my teeth. The air was thick with the stench of ozone and something else, the sterile chemical smell of a server room overheating. Your composition is flawed, I said, stopping a few feet from him. It's built on a foundation of corpses. It's unstable. All great art requires sacrifice, the barista stated, turning back to the console. And soon you will witness the finale. Anya, now, I yelled. The world exploded in a flash of white-hot agony. A pain so intense it wasn't a sensation but an erasure. It felt like she had pressed a live wire directly to the nexus of my soul. The scar on my back became a brand, a gateway, a raging inferno. The void, the beautiful, perfect, silent emptiness I had carried inside me for a year, was no longer mine to command. It was being torn out of me. The barista's network, a ravenous parasite, sank its hooks into my very essence and began to drink. My vision went white. I fell to my knees, my body convulsing. But the pain was only the entry point. What came after was worse. The connection opened, and the network rushed in. I felt the collective emptiness of 100 hollowed-out souls, the cold, sterile logic of the barista's code, the agonizing, stretched-thin existence of the human pipes, and underneath it all, a single overriding command, a line of code that ran through everything: sanitize, nullify, harmonize. Morgan. Anya's voice, a tiny, desperate lifeline in the crushing tide of silence. Don't fight it. Ride it. You are the master of that void, not the other way around. So it a better story. A better story. My story. I focused on the pain, the fire on my back. I didn't try to extinguish it. I fed it. I poured every messy, chaotic memory I had into the inferno. The cheap whiskey, the sting of a punch, the smell of Anya's burnt coffee, the scratchy wool of a bad suit, the frustration of a dead-end case, the grief that felt like a shattered glass in my gut. I took the abstract concept of my life and I weaponized it. The network stuttered. The barista at the console flinched, a hand flying to his temple. His placid mask cracked. What is this noise? He hissed. This irrelevant data? It was working. My memories were a virus in his pristine system. But it wasn't enough. He was filtering it, debugging it. The hum intensified. The gray light from the organ flaring brighter as he tried to overwrite my corruption with pure silence. I needed a bigger payload, a more potent strain of chaos. My magic was gone. My will was being siphoned away. All I had left was the world. The real world. The gun, my 38. It was still in my hand, a solid, heavy piece of reality. It wasn't just a tool for making noise, it was a story of violence, of consequence, of a choice made and a life taken. It was a story that ended. I raised the shaking barrel of the gun, not at the barista, not at the organ. I pressed it to my own temple. The network froze. The entire hub, the army of empty men, the pulsing organet, all held its breath. This was a variable they had not accounted for. Self-termination of the core processor. A fatal error in the code. "Morgan, don't!" Anya screamed from somewhere far away. The barista turned, his bored face finally showing an emotion. Utter, complete panic. "No, you can't. The data will be lost. The core will be corrupted." He was right. If I died this way, connected to the network, my death wouldn't be an ending. It would be an event. A memory of pure, absolute negation. A kill switch command injected directly into the heart of the void. I wouldn't just crash the network. I would annihilate it. "It's my city," I snarled, my finger tightening on the trigger. "My story." Click. The sound of the hammer falling on an empty chamber. The weapon was a story, and I had just told it a lie. The expectation of a deafening bang, the finality of a bullet. The network had braced for that impact. But what it got was the anticlimax. The hollow, ringing click of a blank. The sudden vacuum of unspent energy was a shockwave. The barista stumbled back, clutching his head, the chorus of voices in the hub dissolving into a cacophony of digital shrieks. The human organ convulsed, the pipes of flesh writhing as the feedback loop reversed. The signal that had been pouring out of them was now being sucked back in. The empty men, the dead army, began to glitch. Their perfect, synchronized movements faltered. One of them, a woman in a pantsuit, suddenly slumped, her posture going from rigid to a boneless collapse. The gray symbol on her wrist flickered and died. A single, terrified tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. The firewall was failing. The system was crashing. I used the opening. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was acting on pure instinct, the instincts of a private eye who was out of bullets and out of time. I lunged. I didn't tackle him. I didn't punch him. I grabbed the console. It was like grabbing a live power line. The gray energy of the void surged through me. But this time, I wasn't a victim. I was a conduit. I grounded it. My scar wasn't a wound. It was an earth pen. I forced the raw, untamed chaos of my void, the one thing that wasn't part of his clean, sterile network, directly into the motherboard. The console exploded in a shower of sparks and black smoke. The barista screamed a real human scream of agony and betrayal as the system he had become one with was torn apart from the inside. The beautiful, terrifying song of silence devolved into a screech of white noise, then sputtered into nothing. The effect on the hub was instantaneous. The organ of people went limp. Their bodies, no longer held in contorted poses by the signal, collapsed onto the concrete platform, a tangle of limbs and freed souls. The army of empty men simply stopped. They froze in place, their blank faces staring at nothing, their network connections severed. They were just bodies again, empty suits waiting for a funeral. And me? I was thrown back, the connection severing with a final, violent jolt. I hit the concrete floor hard, the world spinning in a dizzying kaleidoscope of pain and color. The air rushed back in, thick with the smell of rust, dust, and the coppery tang of blood. The silence was gone, the hum was gone. All that was left was the sound of my own ragged breathing and the terrified whimpers of the people who were no longer pipes in a terrible organ. Anya and Maya were at my side in an instant. Anya's hands were on my neck, checking my pulse. Her professional calm, a fragile shield against the horror. "Morgan, stay with me. I'm here," I rasped, my throat raw. "Did we win?" Maya was staring at the barista who was writhing on the floor, his body twitching. The bored god was gone, replaced by a terrified teenager. "He's still in there," she whispered. "The signal is gone, but the code, it's like a scar on his brain." He can't. He can't remember who he was before. Anya was already moving, pulling a medical kit from her bag. We can't save him, Morgan. That kind of neural integration. It's irreversible. The person he was is gone. All we can do is make sure he can't hurt anyone else. She prepared a syringe, the liquid inside a clear, final answer. As she approached him, he stopped thrashing and looked at her. His eyes, for the first time, held a glimmer of understanding. A single tear escaped and traced a path through the grime on his cheek. He didn't fight. He just closed his eyes. Anya administered the injection. His body went still. The city began to heal in the days that followed. The glitches stopped. The colors returned. The gray symbols on the walls faded, washed away by the rain. The official story was a gas leak in the old transit hub, a tragic accident. The bodies were attributed to a strange, unknown neurotoxin. The city, ever pragmatic, chose the simple lie over the complex truth. It was easier to forget. We were ghosts at our own funeral. Anya went back to her morgue, her work now tinged with a new, weary knowledge. She was no longer just a doctor. She was a guardian of the line between life and whatever came after. Maya, no longer a beacon for the void, found a job at a small bookstore, surrounded by stories instead of the seams of reality. She was learning to live with the silence of a normal world. And me? I went back to my office. The fire escape was still a twisted wreck on the alley floor. My door was a splintered hole, replaced by a cheap sheet of plywood. Inside, it was a wreck. The file cabinets were indistinct gray shapes, their contents erased. The desk was a scarred slab of wood, its history wiped clean. They had tried to uninstall my life. I sat in the dark, the 38 on my desk, my shoulder a dull, persistent throb. I had won. I had saved the city. I had destroyed the threat. But the victory felt hollow, because in destroying them I had learned their secret. The void wasn't just an absence, it was a potential, a blank page, and I was the one holding the pen. One evening, a week later, there was a knock on my plywood door. Not the rhythmic mechanical knock of the empty men, just a hesitant human tap. I opened it. It was Maya. She held a small potted plant in her hands. An orchid. The leaves were a healthy, vibrant green, and a single, delicate purple blossom was just beginning to open. "I thought you could use some color," she said, stepping inside. She looked around the ruined office, her expression sad but not afraid. "It's quiet now." "Yeah," I said. "It is." "But you're not," she said, her gaze finding mine. "Are you?" I didn't answer. "I still hear it sometimes," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. Not the hum, just an echo of the song they were trying to sing. It was so sad, Morgan. Not because it was evil, but because it was lonely. It just wanted to make everything the same, so it wouldn't feel so alone. She placed the orchid on the corner of my desk, a single point of vibrant, defiant life in the gray ruin. "It's over," she said, a note of hope in her voice. "I know," I lied, because as soon as she left, I went to the window and looked down at the alley, at the wreckage of my fire escape. Lying in the twisted metal, half hidden by shadow, was something that hadn't been there before. A single, perfect, white feather. I hadn't brought it back from the void. I hadn't kept it as a souvenir. It had been left for me. The silence wasn't an ending. It was a ceasefire. And someone, something, was still out there, reading my story, waiting for the next chapter. My shoulder ached, a phantom pain that wasn't from the fall. It was a reminder of the connection. The scar on my back wasn't a closed wound anymore. It was a socket, waiting to be plugged in. The city slept, but I was awake. I was a sentinel in a new kind of war. Not against monsters of mud and bone or ghosts in the machines, but against the quiet, the insidious, seductive promise of peace, the lure of the blank page. I picked up the feather. It was cool and smooth and utterly silent. I was no longer just Morgan Cross, private investigator. I was the source code, the anomaly, the ghost in the city's machine, and my story was just beginning. That was the Verdant Key. Thank you so much for listening and spending your time here with me. If you enjoyed the story, I'd really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. It helps these stories reach more people who love strange worlds and quiet mysteries. There are plenty more coming. More magic, more secrets hiding in plain sight. So stay tuned. And until next time, thanks for being here.